Well, good afternoon and welcome to the January 13th, 2026 City Council special meeting. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For meetings like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials page. In case of a medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, an AED, is located on the counter behind staff to your left on the west side of the room. And in case of an emergency evacuation, emergency exits are through the double doors located at the back of the room, and the doors to the patio can also be used as needed. Thank you all again for joining us. I now call the January 13th, 2026 special meeting of the Eugene City Council to order. And I will turn over to the council president to preside over the remainder of this special meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. Turn on my sound. Thank you, Mayor. Before I turn it over to the recruiters supporting this process, Bob Murray and Associates, I'd like to remind everyone of the process to date. Prior to collecting applications, Council held a community listening session to hear from the public about what is important in a new city manager. Before the posting closed, Bob Murray and Associates met with stakeholders, held a public listening session over Zoom, and held a listening session for boards, commissions, and neighborhood associations to learn more about what is important to Eugene. BMA presented top candidates to council. Council held a meet and greet with candidates. Candidates were interviewed. Just turn it off. Yeah, I'm loud enough as it is. Don't worry about it, Mayor. Oh, for the recording. Okay. Go back to where I was. I lost my place there for a minute. This week, Council held a meet and greet with candidates. Then candidates were interviewed by the executive team, went on a community tour, and were interviewed by partner agencies this morning. They're here now for hour-long interviews with us, and tonight they'll be interviewed by a panel made up of boards and commissions with neighborhood associations in the room to provide feedback to. Bob Murray and Associates will provide us with rankings, information from the full process, and other background information before we begin deliberations in executive session tomorrow at 1:45. With that, I will turn this over to Jeff Morey, Bob Murray and Associates. Jeff?
My mic on? Yeah. Thank you, Council President, Mayor, other members of the council. It's a real honor to be here. I know you all know who we are, but for the audience who doesn't, so my name is Jeff Morey. I'm an executive recruiter with Bob Murray and Associates. In my previous government life, I was the police chief for the city of Vancouver. I was there for about 5 years. And prior to that, I did 26 years here in Oregon at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, and then started working with Bob Murray and Associates, who actually did my recruitment as the police chief. It's a real honor to be selected to do this recruitment. I'm here with the owner, Valerie Phillips of Bob Murray and Associates. If you want to say anything.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Valerie Phillips. I know council knows me, but for the public, I'm the owner and president of Bob Murray and Associates. I've owned the company for about 12 years. We specialize in executive recruitments, and just to give you an idea, we've conducted a little over 40 city manager recruitments in 3 years. So an honor to have been selected to take on this important recruitment for your city.
Thank you, Valerie. So I know most of you know this, but again, for the community, when we were selected to do this recruitment, we started doing outreach efforts in early August to candidates that we thought were potential good people for the city of Vancouver. We opened the recruitment officially after a blessing with council with the brochure in September, and it actually closed after 6 weeks on November 3rd. We had about 50 applicants that applied from all over the country. And interestingly enough, 17 of those 15 were interviewed by Valerie and myself. We brought many of those candidates to you in early December, and that recommended finalist meeting was held on November 24th, and then in December, you interviewed people. So the interesting thing is, out of all those people from all over the country, we have 3 people that are local Northwesterners. I think there's a special culture that belongs in the Northwest, and I'm very excited to present these 3 people to you. Normally, we would talk about confidentiality and what stays in the room needs to stay in the room, but this is a public forum, so I hope you enjoy your time you spend with these candidates. And with that, I will close.
Our first candidate, I believe. Oh, go ahead.
And just as clarifying, we all have a list of questions ahead of us, and we're just going to go in order
Right.
on the list? Okay.
Go in order by ward. So, well, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get started into the questioning.
All right, thank you, Councilor Evans. I'm Matt Rodriguez. I am currently the Assistant City Manager for the City of Eugene, and I'm really excited to be here and have the opportunity to talk with you about the City Manager position.
Can you talk into the mic, Matt, because
Oh.
I don't think everybody's hearing you.
Did that not get picked up? Should I do it again?
Do it, take 2.
All right, we'll take 2. Thanks for that feedback. So I'm Matt Rodriguez. I'm currently the Assistant City Manager for the City of Eugene. And I'm excited to be here to have this opportunity to talk with you about the City Manager position. So thank you for having me.
Our first question will be asked by Ward 1 City Councilor Elijah Kozinski.
Thank you, and good to see you, Matt. Thank you. Can you tell us how you've built relationships with community partners and collaborative jurisdictions? And can you talk about what collaborations you've had that have been particularly constructive and ones that have been more challenging?
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. I think this is an area over my 21 years where I've had a lot of opportunity to build relationships with our community partners. I'll try to just pick a couple examples because I know we probably have a lot to discuss here. With the city, in my 21 years, I've predominantly worked in public works, moving up in increasingly complex leadership positions into traffic engineer, city engineer, public works director, and then the last 2.5 years as assistant city manager. A couple major opportunities for coordination that I've been a part of have been the downtown riverfront, and actually the acquisition of our city hall. And both of those were predominantly relationships with eWeb on the front end, and being able to work with them to find kind of mutually beneficial opportunities to work together. So not all negotiations with partners are easy. Often we might have interests that are somewhat diverging, but these processes were actually ones where we could find common ground and really move through it. So I'm really proud of the work. I actually was the lead negotiator for the purchase of City Hall, as well as one of the policy advisors for the downtown riverfront project, the work with eWeb to acquire the property, and the work with the developers to come in and start development of then what we are starting to see pop out of the ground now. Some other initiatives and kind of opportunities for coordination would be with our regional partners like Lane County and the city of Springfield. We often have projects like transportation projects or grant opportunities where if it's possible to find that ability to work together, it really benefits the community overall. And a couple of those are work with the county to really talk about how we intentionally transfer streets that are within our urban growth boundary, but maybe on the edge of our city limits, and makes sense because there is kind of a mix of city and county property, especially in the River Road area, to really think about how we partner to invest in streets. So we have discretionary federal funding that's available to us every few years. And we've been able to work with the county and identify specific projects where we're co-applying and saying it makes sense for both of us to invest in this project. One example would be Hunsaker Road, to make this a safer street for everyone, to bring it up to an urban standard, and then for the city to take it from the county. Another example is working with the city of Springfield and actually all of our regional partners, because it was our #1 priority as part of our United Front lobbying effort, which I'll briefly speak to that, which if folks don't know is when a number of regional partners, it's local governments in Lane County, includes some of our school districts, includes some special districts. We all sit down together and talk about what our shared priorities are, to talk to our congressional and delegation in Washington, D.C., and our senators. That takes a little bit of give and take, right? We typically have one #1 project and priority when we go on these trips, and that means that we have to decide what that is, because there are endless priorities, but it takes us coming together and agreeing. And one of those was Franklin Boulevard. So Franklin Boulevard, not only for the city of Eugene, but for the city of Springfield. We worked together to actually with Springfield and with that delegation to create a project that improved a section in the city, which is largely in front of the University of Oregon, transforming what was a former highway into a more urban and safer street, and then a section in the city of Springfield in their Glenwood area they're trying to develop. So coming together to put together a package in which we went and asked for that funding. We talked to our legislators. We were successful in getting, and now we're working together in how we deliver that. The city of Eugene actually is acting as the agency delivering the project, because we are locally certified with ODOT and with FHWA to deliver federal projects.
Second question, Ward 2.
All right, thank you, Counselor.
Go forward, Counselor Keating.
Matt, thank you for being here this afternoon. In an increasingly volatile political climate,
Yeah.
how will you balance the desires of our community and council with a federal administration whose policies might be at odds with and even in direct conflict with the city of Eugene? And are there examples or relevant or recent occurrences you can point to that might help council better understand how you will navigate these challenges?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a reality that definitely all of our partner organizations, I just had a panel with many of our local government partners, and we actually talked about this exact thing. So one of the things that's been really challenging with the current federal administration is just clarity around available funding. And there are changes that are occurring that sometimes would limit our ability to access funding. And there are lots of lawsuits that are going on that sometimes open those back up. So it's really hard to actually plan for the funding we've typically relied on for decades. One of the things that I think that's important for the city manager, and that I would do in this role, is to make sure that we are looking at council policy. We are looking at our goals and our vision, and I'm taking council direction in order to figure out how to engage with that challenge. So there are some examples in the last year of how we've done that. For instance, we did join a federal lawsuit related to some language in transportation grants that would have prohibited us from being able to access them. Language that would have been in violation with our Oregon sanctuary laws, language that would have made it hard to accept funding because there were clauses saying that it could be taken back for any reason at all. And that's a high level of risk when you're talking about projects that are in the tens of millions of dollars. It's a challenging thing to be able to do. I know there's also a lot of concern in the community, and especially the immigrant community, about impacts of federal immigration enforcement. That's a really tough one for local government because we do have a very limited role in that. And our role is to make sure that we are meeting state law, the Oregon sanctuary laws, and that we are not participating in that enforcement in any way. And one of our roles, and again, this is where council's direction really is important in the way that we posture, is to understand how we can best support the community at large, especially when you have a community that is feeling fear about the way federal law is being currently enforced.
Thanks for being here today.
Counselors, because we're having feedback, we're gonna switch to ceiling mics. The people online will still be able to hear you, but
So don't turn these
we're
on.
having too much feedback issues.
So we don't turn these on,
You don't need to turn them on.
turn them off. All right, I'll speak loudly. Thanks for being here, Matt. There are really two really important issues in Eugene that are crying out for more funding: climate change and homelessness, and addressing homelessness. In an environment of limited funds and resources and other competing interests, other than that, because there's so many issues that are in play, how do you address funding for these important issues and still make progress?
That's a great question, and as you know, Counselor, that has been the subject of a number of council conversations because it is a tough nut to crack. You know, I can kind of speak to my experience in both of those areas and then maybe come back to funding. So with the City of Eugene, I was the co-project manager for the first internal climate action plan. I served for 6 years as part of the National American Public Works Association Center for Sustainability, which is that national committee looking at sustainable practices, and chaired it for 2. So it is something that I believe in. I authored a chapter in their operations manual on creating a growing sustainable community. So it is something that is, I feel a lot of purpose in and resonance with. And it is a challenge, and I think we really, in the last few years, geared up to try and access federal pots of money that now are not available. So I personally think when we're thinking about being creative, and we're trying to not test the limits of what the community can afford, that we need to think about how we're integrating even further, because I think we do it now, integrate even further that work into everything we do. And that's not to do it without thinking about how much it costs and about the return on investment that we would get for those investments. So I also think there are some opportunities to talk with council about how we might fund it creatively, but it's hard to have a specific answer on that right now. So for housing and homelessness, I was one of the co-incident commanders for our unhoused incident command structure during COVID and coming out of COVID, and trying to address the crisis of houselessness that we have and we're still working on. Part of that work was really to think about how we are partnering and identified roles and responsibilities with our organizations that are in the city and doing great work. It was also working very deeply with our nonprofits to understand what role they could play and how they could scale to help address the issue. We were able to stand up 350 new shelter beds as part of that process. And then we also worked on a new structure for how we handle public space management. And I think that process and that balance is something that we need to continue to test, because we need to understand what the right balance is. With state funding impacts, here that we've had this last year where we, in Lane County, lost about half of our shelter funding. It's been amazing how our shelter providers have stepped up to try and figure out how we keep operations running. At the same time, losing the funding to have the service component that actually is the engine of helping people exit houselessness. So I think our homeless services team continues to be deeply engaged in that work. I met with them last month to talk about like, where can we go from here? How do we continue to look at innovative solutions? They're really great at trying to stand up new shelter and supporting that with our nonprofits. And there's opportunities to look at things like detached single room occupancy units that could be funded in a different way. So they might be able to access other funding from the federal government, and it might be able to take a very modest amount of income of the folks that are actually living in those units to go towards it. So it's a different model of how we do that work. We also need to be, and I know council's engaged in this, ready to really engage with our state legislature over this next year and with state governments and agencies, because the formula for how shelter funding will be apportioned is supposed to be reconsidered. And we have one of the most efficient and cost-effective systems in the state, and we still lost half of our funding because that return on investment is actually not currently counted in how they apportion funds. So I think that is one way that we can continue to go after funds with partners to bring it into our local community where we know we have a high level of need.
Counselor Ye.
Thank you. Nice to have you here, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be
So
here.
my question is, can you tell us about your approach to using the triple bottom line or an equity lens in your work?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, as I mentioned, I think sustainability, which really is based on the triple bottom line, so thinking about the environment, about people, and about the economy are central to any of that thinking. That has been part of what I've tried to instill in any of the work that we've done. As I came up through Public Works, I was one of the first folks to basically pilot use of warm mix asphalt, which has a lower greenhouse gas emission component to it because it's batched at a lower temperature. It also can last longer because it's not burned actually at the time. You don't also get smoke emissions. So it's kind of early indicator of, hey, that's better for public health. It's better for the environment, and actually it costs less and lasts longer. So it's a win-win-win. We can't always find those, but I think we need to think about those elements in any decision making that we are looking at. Another example of where we're trying to use that lens is with Golden Gardens Park and a conversation, and folks that have very strong opinions rightly on what that park should not only look like, but what are the materials that we use in the fields that can serve the community in the best way. I think that as a council that you've also been very interested in learning about those elements. So I think as the city manager, my role is to give you the best information that you need in order to make a decision. We take that information and then we operationalize it internally. So we built an ethic of that within the organization. I think I've been a part of that being a consistent ethic. And I also think it makes sense for council to potentially revisit how they want that information to be best presented to you.
Counselor Clark.
Thanks, sir. Matt, thank you for being here and going through all this. I gotta ask the hard question.
Sure.
Is the future use of ALPR technology in Eugene a good idea or a bad idea? And why or why not?
Thank you for that question. So, obviously we're coming off the back of a 6-month-long community conversation about use of automated license plate, reading technology. I want to bifurcate that a little bit because a lot of strong feeling is around the company, the vendor that was providing that that technology for the city.
Need new microphones.
So there's a lot of strong community sentiment that that company was not the right one for our community, that there were issues of trust, and partially that's because that company had released some local data to federal authorities without them knowing it. And really wanting us to make sure that we were keeping the rights and privacy of the public foremost in mind. And and that rightly so. So as you know, we had a discussion over months about what the appropriate thing to do was, and council directed or recommended to the city manager that we turn those cameras off, which we did. We then engaged with that vendor about terminating the contract. Their answer on removing cameras wasn't to our satisfaction, and we took action to actually remove those cameras ourselves until they could come pick them up. I think in hindsight, what I would have loved to us have done, and it would be hard to have known this in the moment, because I think that energy really built after we had already been through a process to identify a vendor and have a contract, is what the constraints of a system might be that make people feel that they're still protected, but also have utility and value to law enforcement. Because there is a proven value in the technology for law enforcement. But I think what we heard loud and clear is that folks don't want that to be wide open, right? They don't want access to be wide open. They want us to really think about how that technology can be deployed within the framework that we have for accountability, right? So we have very strong police accountability mechanisms with a police auditor, civilian review board, and a police commission that has policy. And how might we rethink having a technology with a vendor, a different vendor who we ask different questions of? And one of the questions we've talked about, if council were to support implementing this technology, again, is very specifically asking how this vendor is going to meet Oregon sanctuary law, right? Up front, the minute it's turned on, if council elects to go there, what does that look like? So I am hopeful, actually, that we can find a place to bring this technology back. I think in the statistics that Chief Skinner has actually presented, you can see it actually is impactful. And it's not only impactful in the speed of addressing criminal activity, but we have limited resource, right? We have limited resource to make an impact on criminal behavior in the community, and it is a tool that can be impactful.
Matt, I have the next question. What safeguards do you think are necessary for the use of artificial intelligence and related emerging technologies in city work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, as you know, the pace of technology is pretty fast right now. I think we're trying to understand how to take managed risk, right? To be thoughtful about it, but not to discard technology out of hand when it can be useful. I'll give a quick example about starting to use Copilot AI as part of our Microsoft suite, right? This is just a little thing, but which is basically a tool to do research, to help you think about communications. Like there are uses that are very impactful to productivity if you know how to use the technology. So our internal city team spent, I think, probably 6 months. We had a group come together to work on AI policy and guidance to really understand what the risks were and what benefits were. The committee went through that process, made a recommendation to a policy team, which included myself and Christy Hemmett, our other assistant city manager, as well as Mia Carriaga, our central services director. And we reviewed deployment of that technology. We then piloted it with a limited number of folks. And once we had a chance to experiment with it and feel comfortable with it, we deployed it. So I think that all to say is that I think you need to step in and understand a technology before you widely deploy it. And this is something I think that's part of the learning from Flock as well, right? Like, because you want the minute that you're bringing it out and you're introducing it internally or you're introducing it to the community, you want it to be configured in the way that you have intentionally, right? You've intentionally provided it.
Counselor Leach.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you, Matt, for being here. Can you describe your approach to building an efficient, collaborative organization where employees feel supported and valued? And what specific actions will you first take to move or continue the culture in that direction?
Yeah, thank you. We have a really exceptional city organization. The people that work for the city are invested, they're dedicated, and they show up every day to work with our community to make this a better place. I truly believe that. When I came to the city of Eugene, I came from a rural public works department in Northern California where that was not a culture. It was not a culture of people doing excellent work and every day really putting in the time and finding purpose in their work. So it's something that I've always really appreciated and want to foster as the city manager if you choose me for this position. There are a couple things that I'd like to focus on, and I've talked a little bit about this with the executive team in that interview. One is, I think since the pandemic, one result I think of the pandemic that we've seen is that it has caused a little bit of folks going back into their work. So we had all these citywide real all-court presses. So we had the Emergency Operations Center where we were bringing people from across the organization out of their normal jobs to do this work to support the community. We had the same thing with the unhoused incident command system, bringing people from across the organization towards this purpose. There's a lot of power in being able to do that and impact that you can have in a fairly rapid way, and it can exhaust folks. And so I think the hangover of that in some way is folks wanting to go back to their normal job and really focus on the work that they do. So a symptom of that, I think to some extent, is we've lost a little bit, even though we do it well, but we've lost a little bit of the cross-boundary coordination that really is the magic of the work that we do. I think that we also moved into a space where there were a lot of decisions that had to actually be made by top leadership just because of the nature of them. And I think we can start to build a culture where we're more aligned and decision making can start to flow down to the level appropriate. But in order to do that, we really need to align. So another piece that we've been talking about is if I'm in this role, or actually even if I'm not, how I can support more frequent communication with our city staff, different ways that we're engaging, so that they feel like they understand what are the top things we're working on right now. Because I think we've done a good job of bringing people together with all city meetings and talking about celebrating things and having some hard conversations. But there's a real appetite for folks to know what is leadership really focused on and why. And I think that's an opportunity to do that. And if folks feel like they understand that, I think they're more aligned with purpose. And then when they're going out and they're making decisions for their work group, it will be more in alignment with across the organization. They'll feel more empowered to do their work.
Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Matt, for taking the time to be here and showing your interest in the position.
Thank you.
This next question I want to preface with, this is not directed at any specific project, past or present. If you believe that economic growth is vital to our community's stability and well-being through the provision of jobs, taxes, and fees that support services, how would you respond to those in the community who are vocal in their opposition to growth and development?
Yeah, thank you. The last, I think, 6 months has been fairly eye-opening for me in this area. As you know, one of the initiatives that we worked through the fall in is bringing together a group of technical experts from across organizations in the community, nonprofits, business leaders, finance experts, to talk about our financial situation, build shared understanding, and to benefit from their knowledge when we think about the work we do. I mean, at one point, the question that former city manager Maderi asked this group is, I really, what would you do if you were me in some of these situations? Like really trying to have folks understand where we are. I think that was it was an incredible example of how when you are open, right, and collaborative, that you can take advantage of the good ideas, the goodwill, and the love of this community from the folks that are part of it. So I think it's been a very successful conversation. Council had the preliminary recommendations shared with you in December. We'll be back on February 9th to talk about a full report. So I want to now wrap back. So some of the work that we did with that team is benchmarking with other cities. And one of the most impactful statistics that I saw, and it's actually a relatively new one, is that since 1991 to today, the city of Eugene has grown jobs by 30%. We benchmarked to, I think, 5 other cities. The next city was 50%, which is Spokane. The city after that was Salem at 60%. So Salem has created twice as many jobs as we have since 1991. You can start to look at some of the others and it goes up to like 167%. Some of those, they have different contexts than we do. One of them's Bend. They have a tourism industry that's generating jobs. That is a different context than we're going to operate in. But I think it really started to identify how much we actually have been underperforming in job creation. We are the only city that added less jobs than people in that timeline that we looked at. I think some of the other learning through that process is, through some of the folks in healthcare that participated, is that you can actually see that type of impact in things like our healthcare system and the mix of private payers and public healthcare, Medicaid and Medicare. If you don't have a healthy balance there, it starts to destabilize the healthcare system, and we are seeing that locally. And adding more living wage jobs with benefits are a way that actually can help stabilize that. It's a way that we can, have jobs built upon jobs if we're able to create high-paying jobs in this area. So one thing that's really exciting to me is this vision of the South Willamette Valley Innovation Corridor. It is still very conceptual, and for those that may not be familiar, it's really using the anchors of our research universities of Oregon State and University of Oregon to really try and feed the work they do into creating innovation and jobs in our community. The University of Oregon has the night campus, which is really unique, I think, fairly unique in the United States, and it's a great opportunity to build life science jobs in our community. And I think the types of jobs that most people in our community would really support. I do think, I'll speak to where as well as how. So one of the ways that we're thinking about this is how downtown can be a campus as well, right? We've had a lot of conversations about the health of our downtown and our city core, and this is a place as partners we're trying to look and think about how investment could be targeted there, right? Could that be wet lab space? Is there an opportunity for housing to support the new jobs we want to create there? I think that's a focus. And then we're also looking at areas of the city where we've expanded, such as the Clear Lake area. I know there are mixed feelings from community members about whether or not that's the right place to develop, but I want to take people back to the very engaged process that we went through to identify that as a place to expand for economic development. In Oregon, we have land use laws that require us to be very intentional and thoughtful And we've gone through that, and that is the place that we've identified. So none of these decisions are taken lightly. It's been an intentional work by you, by City Council, and also intentional engagement with the community to decide that's a place we should invest. So that's, I think, the message I would have.
Thank you.
Matt, do you have any questions for us?
Yes, sure. I didn't know I'd have that.
Excuse me, President Evans, this is a good opportunity for the rest of council, anyone who has follow-up questions as well.
Okay.
And we have Matt until about 1:10. Excuse me, 2:10.
All right. Do you have follow-up questions? Be happy to answer them.
No, you're on, Matt. Shoot.
I'm on, all right. Thank you for that. Okay. So one question I have for you is, looking ahead, how would you define success for the new city manager in the first year?
We're thinking.
Take your time.
Councilor Zelenka.
When Sarah first started, I took her aside and I said, if you can make sure the city is on stable financial footing and you have a really good understanding of that and get that handled, the council will give you a lot of leeway on other stuff, because that becomes the most important thing when it's not happening. And so having the financial house in order is critically important for a successful city manager. That enables all the other things to occur. And then, keeping the council informed, following through on direction of the council, but also making progress on things that's important to the council. And helping the council figure out what's important. Because city managers has their shoulder to the grindstone and nose to the ground more than council in certain areas that we don't get to play in. So hopeful hints.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was actually gonna ask a question about financial stability, but since that was already handled by Councilor Zelenka, I'll ask, in a sea of issues, sometimes conflicting issues, and a lot of distractions, what will you do to help keep the council on point so that we stick to our priorities and work through our sometimes time-sensitive issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I know that I'm sure that as counselors, you have a lot of community demands that are asked of you. A lot of hopes that folks have, and I know that it's hard to address all of them because we have limited resources to do that. I think there's a couple things that are anchors in that. So one, I'm excited for the conversation about long-range financial planning that we'll be having with council this late winter, early fall. And part of that work, and something that you've asked us to do, is to hold a workshop and be able to talk about the financial policies we have and priorities. And I think that that's a helpful thing to revisit. It's not to say that council would choose to change them, but we haven't looked at them in quite some time. And it's good to reaffirm or adjust as it makes sense to. One thing that we are working to do as well, because we've had this question asked a lot, is to identify at the corest of core, what are the things that a city needs to provide to exist? And that's not to say we would ever want to have a level of service there, but it's to really understand what are the things we absolutely positively need to do so that we can have an informed conversation about what it is we want to do. So I'm excited about that. And I think that those policies can help drive all of the conversations that we have throughout the year and thinking about the things you may want to do. The second is their strategic plan. So we had our first strategic plan that we put in place a couple of years ago. And we're looking now at updating the plan and the process to do that. We've built a strategic budgeting cycle, as you know, that grounds itself in our community survey and feedback, how we're doing in crucial areas that the community is concerned about. It feeds into a strategic planning process that talks about what you want to see, what you want our folks to be doing out in the community on your behalf. And then it also feeds into budget conversations. Part of that we're really continuing to develop and we haven't quite seen yet is we're also building performance measures into the services that we provide to understand how they are positively impacting or maybe they're not impacting it to the point we want to into those strategic goals so that we can provide that information to you and you can use that as part of your thinking when you're thinking about decision making. So for me, I think that those would be helpful things and I think they would be things that I would be helping to ground us in as we have conversations about what we want to do as a community.
Counselor Clark.
I'm gonna withdraw my question. It was already kind of asked in the mix of what those two guys asked.
Counselor Ye.
Yeah, so I don't have a question. I wanted to respond to your question really quick because I agree with everything that Councilor Zelenka said, but I wanted to add that I would expect that the first year you planned and executed an outreach to our community. To not that everyone would agree and love you, but that there was connections made and people felt like they knew how to get a hold of the new city manager. They understood their priorities, and they just were start having that connection with you as in this new position.
I appreciate that and that would definitely be part of my plan.
I figured.
Counselor Leach.
Thank you. I want to reiterate that vision of, Matt, you mentioned that internal communications was one of your goals. I would say absolutely, and as well as communicating our message and what we're doing to the community in a way that's really easy to understand and accessible. That's definitely a vision I have for this year and beyond. I also have a follow-up question. Many people, including myself, are very concerned about the federal actions being taken against our community members. Do you think that there's more that we can do as a city to better protect our community? And what would that be?
Thank you for that question. I know that, as I kind of alluded to before, I think it's a real challenge, and I know folks are really, some folks in our community are really looking to feel supported and to feel safe, and they're looking for local government to assist with that. It is a challenge because we have only so much of a role. Again, our job for Oregon sanctuary law is to make sure we're meeting it. It unfortunately does not apply to the federal government, whether we would like it to or not. I think that the council conversations and a motion that you brought is helpful to thinking about what else we can do. I do think that this is a place we would be looking for council input if you want to do something different. So we're in the process of reaching out to local service providers to understand what needs they may have, as you know. And I think there's going to be a conversation with council about a resolution that affirms our values and support that could come before council for a vote. Besides that, some of the work we've been looking at is to provide more resources on our website, just for folks to understand if they are looking for help and assistance where they can find that. And I also think, for me, one of the things, again, whether I'm the city manager or the assistant city manager, something I'm looking to do here in the next couple of weeks is actually connect with some of our community leaders and for social services and just community leaders in this work, supporting immigrant community to understand better what they're experiencing and if there is a place that we might be able to provide support in a way that aligns with council direction and what you're trying to accomplish.
Our counselors. Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Council President. Matt, thanks for the thoughtful question. How would we determine your success over the next year? I would add external communications to the internal. Finding a way to increase individual counselors' ability to communicate with our individual boards would be at the top of my list. Landing a fire EMS solution that ensures safety and services and stabilization for the community. Ensure, not that it would fall all on you, but it would help underscore your success if the library levy passes. Jobs are created, cranes are in the air, and services provided to our community members who are most vulnerable are not cut into for the sake of budgeting purposes. On that point, how do you see in the coming year a potential return of mental health and behavioral health services, a CAHOOTS 2.0? For lack of a better term.
Appreciate that. So I'm excited to share that we are working on the RFP for what we're calling peer navigation, which is the gap that we've identified now that we have a new service set with Lane County Mobile Crisis Services now providing assistance for people that have chronic challenges. So peer navigation will really focus on welfare checks, on things like wound care, potentially transport. I think we're looking at that area, but that gap and connection to services, right? How does that intersection with someone potentially lead to them being able to access service in a different way and potentially housing? We have a pilot of that that's starting downtown with some limited grant funding and some community safety payroll tax. It's helped inform, even though it just started, but it's already helped inform the RFP that we're gonna put out that is a pilot that will be helping to cover a wider swath of the city. It'll have some focus areas likely where there's the most need, but be available as needed throughout the community. As we work through that pilot, we'll be coming back to council to talk about what we've learned and what we might need to consider investing to keep that service running. So I'm excited about that. Outside what we provide, I'm excited that the Crisis Stabilization Center is continuing to move forward. So that project is in design right now. That's not to say there aren't challenges with it being built and finding funding to operate it, but we've made, the county in partnerships made significant steps to start moving that forward, and I think it'll be really impactful in the community. One thing that I just want to speak to, since multiple folks have brought it up about external communications, I completely agree with that, and I'm really excited that we have Ella Casey, our new communications director, on board, and she's been able to, in her short time here, start to build that vision of what we can do going forward in a different way. One of the things that we are looking to do this year is actually create a series of short videos that are really digestible for folks. Part of that's informed by the learning that we've had through the TAG process about how we actually do our budgeting, where our revenue comes from, how it's used, how council makes decisions, and what that process is. So I think that model, and it's something that councilors can access, that the mayor can access when you're out talking to constituents, can be really powerful. And that's just kind of a first start in us thinking about that. We've also talked about exploring how we might be able to do things like that when we talk about building permits, or a process where you have a new business that's trying to launch in the city, and how do you help them actually navigate some of the complexity to get the outcome we all want, right, is to assist with that new business flourishing.
Matt, I have one follow-up to Counselor Ye's question about the triple bottom line. So we know that triple bottom line is inclusive of our environment, which you addressed with the sustainability response in your question, but two areas that you didn't really touch on. One of them was the equity piece, and the other one was economic development, which you addressed in another question, but I'd like you to be a little bit more precise in that. And more specifically, and we talked about equity, is recruitment and retention of staff. particularly a diverse staff.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I apologize if I didn't hit that nail on the head. I had meant to address at least part of that in that answer. But what I can add to is there's a lot of work that's been done in this organization over the past 6 or 7 years to build on how we engage with an equity lens, how we take feedback, and how we implement programs. And I think that work, what we are trying to do in our Office for Equity and Community Engagement is really a foundational piece that consults within the city, but we're trying to operationalize that within everything we do. And you can see that in some of the housing work that's been done by planning and development, building a toolkit around equity to understand how to engage in that work and where we might need to invest. You can see that in the way that we're looking at infrastructure and where we're putting dollars to help improve walking and biking in the community. Not that there's not more to do, but we're looking at areas that are historically underinvested to figure out how we build in those systems in those areas. From an economic perspective, I think there's two things, right? There's the ability to grow jobs and grow wealth for everyone in our community, and then there's just making sound financial decisions. Are we actually getting a benefit that makes sense for the amount of money that we're spending on something? And you know, when we've talked about investments, we often hear that from counselors, and I really appreciate that because that is a really important metric for us to understand when we're trying to use the limited resources we have. And then I think a last piece related to that is that if we can create more economic opportunity in the city, often you see that the most diverse cities in the country are the ones with the greatest economic opportunity. That is a way that we can draw new people here and also keep folks here if we're creating jobs that are attractive to people. When you think about our city workforce, I think that it gets back to how are we working to understand what the capacity is to do work, right? We have a lot of demands from the community, and rightly so, but we also have limited capacity, and we've been running pretty hard over the past few years, definitely since the pandemic. So I think being thoughtful about when we're talking about new programs is really important. Can we support them? And is that going to help our workforce, you know, have the well-being that we need them to have to actually do their jobs in the way we want them to on behalf of the community? So I think part of that internal communication that I was talking about is trying to help folks have more of an intersection with a sense of purpose in the work we're doing. But it's not just one way. It's also to be able to hear from them how they are doing, how they feel like they are aligned, and whether or not they have the resources that they need to do their work. Another example quickly of that is doing some of our internal organizational assessments. So we've done a central business function assessment that is currently in process, and that's like all of our central services. So finance, our ERC, which we call human resources in most of the community, our risk services, our IT services, our fleet, our facilities, to understand how they're operating, whether our opportunities to have efficiencies, and a lot of that is through systems that we use, like software we use to automate things more. But it's also to see where we need help, and that is something that we'll continue to do, and we have been doing historically across services to make sure they're as efficient as they can be, and we're resourcing them as much as we can, even knowing that typically almost every service we provide could use more funding to be more impactful.
Are there any other questions from counselors in terms of follow-up? Anything else you have for us, Matt? You're at the 10-minute warning.
Okay, well, I'll just add, you know, in the other interview, you asked me a little bit about why I was interested in this position, and if it's okay in the last minutes, I just want to share that. So I've been privileged to be an employee of the city of Eugene for over 21 years. My wife and I have two boys that are 20 and 17. This is their home. It's our home. It's a place we love. I've shared the story of how we chose to be here, which was very intentional, and maybe I'll share it again very briefly. My wife and I met in Chicago. We came back to where I grew up in Northern California in a very rural area. Realized that wasn't the place that we wanted to be, and we decided to really try to choose the place that would align with our values and that we would really feel a part of community. We geeked out and made a spreadsheet that had like 8 different factors that we scored, because I'm an engineer and she's leans that way too. And Eugene came out with this really high score, and we're like, wow, let's check out Eugene. And we came to Eugene on a rainy fall day, and I went for a run on Breeze Trail and fell in love. And we never went to any of the other cities. This was the place. So I was lucky enough to get a job 2 months after that with Public Works Engineering. And I've just really enjoyed every minute and every position I've had in this organization. And I feel like that experience and the connection and relationships I've built in this community will be really helpful in the next steps that we take as a community and in the role as city manager. I understand this organization. I understand where we might be able to, move in different directions, or where maybe we're not ready for change. And we've been going through a lot of change, and we need to, I think, and as city manager, I would think, we really need to be mindful of that. We need to make sure we're bringing folks along with us so we can get the outcomes that we want. Sometimes you do need to go slow to go fast. So I'm excited about that. I think I've got the skills and experience to be a great city manager for Eugene. And as I've also said to you before, regardless of the outcome, I'm committed to this organization. I'm committed to you. I'm committed to this community, and I will show up in the best way that I can to support it. And I trust you to make the right decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and we appreciate your presentation today. So All right. I'm not the mayor and I don't play one on TV. That's the mayor. Right. So, candidate before us, Jenny, you'll have to tell me how to pronounce your last name because I am lousy at that. So, Haruyama, okay. Yeah, yeah,
For those at home, it's Hariyama.
Haruyama, okay. Welcome, Jenny. Welcome to this interview session with our city council and our mayor here. We are going to be asking questions in order of city council wards. And we will start off with Ward 1 and Councilor Kaczynski.
Thank you, and thank you. It's great to get this chance to talk with you about this role. Can you tell us about how you have built relationships with community partners and collaborating jurisdictions? And can you talk about which collaborations you've had that have been particularly constructive and ones that have been more challenging?
It's a great question. So my experience in terms of collaboration and building those partnerships ranges. In Beaverton, we actually have a unique situation because we have a number of special districts. So we do some parks, but not all parks. So we have a park district. We do some water, but not all water. So we have multiple water districts. We also have a clean water district, and we also have a fire district. I mean, we work actively as you do with the county. And so some of those partnerships I'd probably want to give you an example of would be with the county. We actively work on implementing what's called a supportive housing service fund that was allocated through Metro. It affects 3 different counties, and so Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County. And so that pretty much funds all of the homeless shelter needs. And we've been building this infrastructure throughout the entire region. And so some of those conversations are around IGA development, and that's where the partnership comes in. One of the kind of areas in which I would say that we collaborated, but also had some difference of opinion, because of course that's going to occur, is in the provision of services and our role in helping to select who that will be. We had a shelter built in our community thanks to some of the dollars that we raised at the state and the federal level. No property tax was used coming out of the city's general fund. And so we had to be able to have a seat at the table, part of the RFP process, in order to help select who is going to provide homeless services. And so that was a negotiation through the IGA process as we determined what the terms would be. And so working with our partners in that way so that we would have a seat. The other would be how the money is given and funded to the city, making sure that the county was supportive in working with the provider on good neighbor agreements so that when we were having issues or if we had issues with the neighborhood or with the businesses, that there were agreements that folks had entered into. So that's some of the collaboration between the county and I. Another example I would give you, which would also be more of an economic development related partnership, would be with our Parks District. We are home to the training center for the Thorns and the Timbers. And Beaverton is, as you know, is a sports-minded community. We have Nike, we have Columbia. So it's really important that we want to keep these folks here. And so working with the Park District, they had an opportunity to sell their property in which the Thorns use. And so I worked with the general manager to be able to come up with term sheets and negotiation tactics to be able to get that over the goal line and ensure that the Thorns stayed here. And again, these are opportunities that are really important with connection and making sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, because if we were to lose that, that would be a huge loss to the city and kind of a blow to basically what our kind of claim to fame is in Beaverton. So those are some examples that I would give you. And when we don't agree, we try to work those out mutually, let the electeds have their conversations and the administrators kind of stay out of that. And there's been several instances where we've had to agree to disagree on funding strategies, but at the end we try to kind of focus on that shared purpose, which obviously is the community.
Thank you, Council President. Jenny, nice to meet you. Thank
Too.
you. Thank you for being here. In an increasingly volatile political climate, how will you balance the desires of our community and council with a federal administration whose policies might be at odds or in direct conflict with the city of Eugene? And are there examples of recent or relevant occurrences you can point to that might help council better understand how you will navigate these challenges?
Yes, and I think having an aggressive and strong federal framework is really important, both at the state and the federal level. We've had a number of experiences in losing federal funding as a result of either language that we've used in contracts or on our website, and so we've been creative in trying to navigate some of the verbiage that we use. But what we have done is we've been pretty strategic when those things occur, and I'll give you an example. We had been working with an affordable housing bond through Metro to establish a deeply affordable senior housing project. That project lost funding from our federal delegate. We had an earmark of between $2 and $3 million. And that was devastating to the project. If we did not have that money, that project would not get over the goal line. In addition to that project, not only would it be housing, but it would be subsidized childcare on the bottom, and that was by design. So what we did is we aggressively went, this was last legislative session, to our representatives and designed a strategy around getting a capital construction grant through. And one of the things that's really important, and I'll probably again weave in economic development because I think that's going to be a theme for the community, is that understanding what is important to your local representatives, particularly your governor. And the governor on her kind of checkbox was senior housing, childcare. We're a childcare desert, so that's super important to us. So we've been leveraging the need for quite a long time. So we had an opportunity to kind of activate that bottom space that way. But making sure that your agenda mirrors what perhaps the state is looking for is very important, and that's what kind of put us in a great position to be able to secure that money. We were not in a position to take from the general fund. We had to support and balance some of the core services like safety, and so we wanted to preserve that, but we weren't going to let go of this project. And so we were very successful in getting the exact amount of money that we needed to be able to make sure that that project is done, and it will be done this year. So that's one approach that I would recommend that the city consider when they're developing their framework. And that's going to take a lot of work with the council, with the mayor, to be able to be very thoughtful when you're putting forward your housing projects, your capital projects, to try to find that kind of common area, because what is important to them and is important to you, that's when the lights start to light up. And that's really how we're going to try to navigate through this. The other is on your federal lobbyists. They are so critical because they are boots on the ground up at the federal level, and they can let you know what words to use, what grants are actively being not threatened. For us right now, it's working on infrastructure, and we see an opportunity there. So I do think it's going to take a lot of legislative partnerships, work with government relations, and this is where I think this council, the mayor, can be very, very tactical and kind of reviving some of the Oregon 7 conversations around a shared legislative framework, because collectively, you're also going to be able to do more good, shake more trees. And so that would be my 2 cents on that. I think it is a work in progress. The other thing is that a little bit of commentary is, you don't know what you're going to get every day. The landscape is constantly changing, so that's something where we're going to have to be very fluid and be able to kind of pivot and roll with the punches. I don't know what to expect over the next 6 months, let alone the next month, let alone the next week. So again, this is going to take a lot of flexibility, both on my part, your part, and the community's part.
Two of the many important issues in Eugene are addressing climate change and addressing homelessness. They're both crying out for funding. So in an environment where there's limited funding, limited resources, and other many competing interests, how do you address funding for these important issues and making progress on them?
That's a great question and a really tough one, because this kind of gets back to, I think, where the community conversation is going to need to have on prioritization and developing kind of a collective prioritization that can come from my office to the council, but with the community input. We're getting to a place where everything is important, but we're not going to be able to do everything, but we can do some things. So for instance, on homelessness, working to prioritize what's most important and then focusing on those things, I think, is the conversation we're going to have. I had mentioned earlier in my comments about building a homeless shelter, but not using the city's general fund. This, again, I'm going to tie back into the legislative framework because we were so aggressive, being able to get funds from both the state and the feds to be able to support the purchase of that building, it wouldn't have happened if we hadn't positioned ourselves in that way. So that is one way to get the funds. The other is, I'm going to kind of toggle a little bit and go back to the sustainability question. Right now, we're in a position in Beaverton where we have a 5,000 unit development. This is our last large development. It'll increase the population by 15 to 30,000 roughly, depending on what is built there. We designed what's called a Cooper Mountain Plan with our transportation system planning in mind, with our sustainability goals in mind, and that comes at a cost, and it comes at a cost to the developers. And so what is happening right now is we have been able to have wider cross-sections, larger sidewalks, street medians that have tree canopies, making sure that we have either shuttle or transit service, right? All of those things that are needed to have a really good climate benefit, but it comes at a cost. And so right now, the challenge is developers coming in and saying that's going to be too expensive. So how do we respond to that? How do we have to have some trade-offs. Do we want the housing built? Yes, we do. Do we want the climate action benefits? Yes, we do. So we have to meet somewhere in the middle. So now we have a plan that's being readdressed and reconfigured, but trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so what I'm getting at is that there is no secret sauce or solution. It's called compromise, and it's called prioritization, and it's choosing based on the community's input what they're willing to pay for and what comes at the priority. And I think that that's the hardest conversation that we're going to have here, because we're getting to the point where with Proposition 5 and Proposition 50, which constrain us, as you know, we're not going to be in a position to have it all. And so my job for you is going to help you develop that prioritization process with the community so that you can make these decisions, and then we can move forward. That might not completely answer your question, but I think this is an opportunity for you and for the community to hear some of the realities of the work that we have to do collectively together in order to secure core services. I also think that working with your business community, bringing them under the tent in decision-making is also important, because when you do have those revenue conversations, and you are having them for the library levy, and you will have them for other things in the future, it's important that we have our stakeholders listening, understanding, providing input so that they can proudly have a sign in their window saying support measure X or Y or whatever it is. And so I do think part of the answer, kind of maybe looping back on both the sustainability and the homeless, is to make sure that your stakeholders are either fully bought in or that they have been informed and are informing our actions. I think we saw a little bit of challenge with that, with the fire fee. And let's learn from that as we're moving forward when we're developing solutions, either whether they're revenue-based or whether they're reductions that have to be made because we're trying to salvage something that's for the good of the community.
Yeah, thank you. So glad you're here. My question is, can you, oh my gosh, I lost my question. Can you tell us about your approach to using the triple bottom line or an equity lens in your work?
Oh, thank you. So I've had the opportunity in Beaverton to establish an equity office, hire a chief equity officer in management, and also staff to be able to do just that. A couple of examples is we have developed what's called a CIP prioritization lens, in which how we rank CIP projects to determining which projects kind of come first, second, and third. A really great example is kind of our roadways and our paving. So looking at geographic geographic location, the last time we've done some overlays, what the impact is of not doing the work, who lives in the area and the demographic, and kind of using that as a lens to inform. It's not a perfect science, but it really helped to provide some information as we're developing kind of this broader budget prioritization lens that I was talking about earlier that's needed. The other is that we also, through this process, developed a downtown equity strategy, and that was really important because not only did that help us deal with displacement issues, both for residents and for businesses, and to find incentives to support people that were impacted, but it also presented a racial equity lens to be able to hear from residents what type of neighborhood-serving businesses they want, what type of downtown food they would like to eat, and as a result, direct benefit from that, you have Restaurant Row, which is what Beaverton is known for, and that was not an accident, that was by design. And a lot of that downtown equity strategy really informed the folks that we reached out to, how we decided to design our tenant improvement program, which pumps about $500,000 into our downtown each year to support businesses. So it's really important to also make sure that that inclusive lens is with your economic development strategy as well. And then just wrapping up, we've also taken a decision-making lens internally. We have an equity internal team, which we have now navigated into Equity Champions. And we also are developing a Belonging Academy. And the Belonging Academy will be open to both our employees and our community, and it will replace and expand on what's called BOLD. And BOLD is something that's really unique in Beaverton from an equity perspective. We have a very, very high immigrant and refugee population. 1 out of 5 people are from another country, and 1 out of 3 people speak another language. And so what we've done is we designed a program where folks, and we want to just target folks from the refugee and immigrant community. It's open to the public to be able to help them find access, understand government, create a bridge to law enforcement, but also help them advocate at the state and the federal level, because a lot of times they don't know how to navigate systems. And that has been our way to work with Unite Oregon, that has kind of been the conduit, and using our CBOs to be able to, sometimes they get the message out a little bit better than we can and show us where we need to start focusing our engagement. So that's been a really great example of how we've been able to bring folks that don't typically or aren't able to engage kind of to the table. I'm good.
That on? Got it. So I'm gonna ask you a hard question. Is the future use of ALPR technology in Eugene a good idea or a bad idea? Why or why not?
You talking about license plate readers and things of that nature?
Couldn't hear you.
License plate readers and things of that
Correct.
nature? All right.
Automatic license plate reader.
I do, if it's done correctly. We're kind of embarking on that technology front. We don't have flock cameras in Beaverton, but we are entering into a contract with Axon Technologies for basically it's a subscription service for all of our police technology. And we're going to have to move with AI. We're going to have to move with technology, particularly in safety. It's already getting out ahead of us. So I think we're at a disadvantage. There's also a number of benefits to having that. And I'm going to talk both about license plate readers, but also other technology, because a lot of times these groups that are providing that, they kind of all come together in a subscription model. And you can pick them apart the best that you can, but you're not going to necessarily get the savings, so it kind of doesn't make sense. But I do think that making sure we are responsible for where that information goes, we are responsible to protect our residents. And so we've intentionally not gone in the flock direction because of that. Axon does not do that. I know that this topic will be vetted thoroughly by my council because of the security issues. So that's one priority for us. I do think it's a tool for law enforcement. I do think it needs to be used wisely. I don't think it's something that we not use. I think it's the how in which we use it. Just like tools, right? You can use them to a fault or you can use them to have a positive result. The other thing is that AI provides so many different opportunities, right, to be able to serve the community. One thing that is very intriguing to us with the Axon technology that we're now implementing is that it has translation services. So at the tip of your fingerprints, right, you can hit a button and you can be able to speak and translate information with someone that maybe English isn't their first language. Officers don't necessarily have to be bilingual in that moment, right? It's great if you are, but we've got technology right there. We don't have to wait for anybody. We don't have to pay for a translation service, and that's in the moment. So I think if we can be really smart about the technology that we are using and how we use it, I think it's an added benefit. But it doesn't come without guardrails. So I think it's a yes and to your question. But I don't think we can ignore it and we can put our head under the rock. It's coming, it's here. And we're already using it in the city of Beaverton. I have AI policies already implemented. We've already seen a 10% reduction, or excuse me, increase in productivity so that we can get our staff reports out. And I'll just close with one really amazing tool with AI is just the ability from an engagement standpoint. You're in a forum and everybody's speaking, we have people taking notes, we're recording it. You can send all that through AI and they can synthesize that, you can identify the themes, and then we can send council, here's what happened at 5 different meetings that occurred over the past month, and you will know exactly what the residents are saying. That's powerful to have that. And it's just as powerful for our law enforcement to have that tool as well.
No, I think you've already answered question 6 for me.
Well, I'm efficient, right?
But let me elaborate on it because it's my question, and one of the things that prompted this question was I've noticed in various publications across the country that I read on a regular basis that police officers are starting to use AI to write their own reports. So my question was, what safeguards do you think are necessary for the use of artificial intelligence and related emerging technologies in city work? So
That's a
you partially
great
answered it,
question, yeah.
But there are issues with how people are using it to do reports and, you know, again, you know, is this the technology or is this the person who's writing this?
Right, and so part of our policies kind of get to that issue where it is a tool, but it is not used to replace what you are writing. So for instance, don't use it to write your report, but if you want Grammarly, you want some support in that, finding different words, have at it. But I think it's important, for instance, that the chief and the rank and file talk about what good report writing looks like and how to use AI. So if you have Copilot, if you have ChatGPT, whatever your model is, that is to enhance, but remember there's a disclaimer on there that says some of this may not be accurate, some of this may not be true. This is why you don't use that to replace good writing. I do have a concern, though, with that if you are going to be using that in the field and you're solely relying on that, because that is not maybe going to capture everything that happens. And so, again, kind of back to what you had said earlier, guardrails, right? So I do think it's important that when we are rolling out the technology, that the policy spells out the intended purpose, and the intended purpose is not to use that in place of the work that staff has to do. It's to enhance, it's to make better. But so for instance, if I go back to the earlier example I gave you about engagement and capturing what the community said, you can't just have AI do that and I'm a staffer and I'm not looking at it and I give that to you. That's going to require someone to read through it, to make sure it's accurate, to make sure that it reflects what was said, right? It's a tool to get things done quicker, but you are accountable for the document that I give you or that's given to council. So it needs to be factual. So there are some things that come along with that. You can't take advantage of that, especially, as you know, students in high school and everything, they're having, guardrails put on that as well. So I would say that that would be the accountability that you would see from me through my staff to make sure that the data that you're getting is accurate and that you're not getting something that's just hot off the press from a computer.
Counselor Leach.
Thank you, Jenny. Could you describe your approach to building an efficient and collaborative organization where employees feel supported and valued? What specific actions would you take first to move or continue the culture in that direction?
Well, I think I would come in doing an awful lot of listening. I've kind of given some thought to what I would do even before coming to developing kind of a 30, 60, and 90-day plan of engagement with the organization. I do think a series of listening sessions are always really great, making sure that the accessibility is there. So when I say that, a lot of things that have worked really well for me have been doing kind of like off-site on different campuses and having office hours so that people can have access to you. And that's really effective because when they know the city manager is hanging out in a certain place, they do come and they visit. And I started that strategy actually through when we were going to do some really tough budget decisions. And so that worked really well. I literally had people lining up to just talk through some of the impacts. So I think that's important. The other thing that I may have mentioned when we had first talked was this concept of windshield tours and work-alongs. And those are really critical because sometimes people don't think that you care about the work that they do. If you're an accountant and you do, debits and credits and you're working on the general ledger, that may not seem sexy to the average person, but it is really important to that person that's doing it. And I'm glad because I want them to get that right. So, but working alongside, understanding what they're doing, and of course you can't do the entire organization, but I think it's important to be strategic and select different workers so that you understand how they work. You can also get a better sense of the culture. One of the things that I learned really quickly navigating the transition from the strong mayor to the council manager form of government is how change impacts organizations. And how building an airplane while you're flying it impacts the organization. I don't recommend that. But sometimes it has to be done. And I've learned that you've got to go slow to go fast. I've also learned that when you're in a space of change, it is incredibly important to have assigned staff that are the ears and the eyes, and because you can't be everywhere as a city manager. But boots on the ground, understanding what's happening, because when, for instance, you're making a big decision, as the mayor said last night at the State of the City, right? It's going to change. It's going to make people fearful, anxious, right? And so there needs to be this level of psychological safety made in the organization so that they know that the new person that's coming in is going to embrace the culture, is going to support it, is going to add value to it. And so for me, doing that is talking, is getting out there, is seeking to understand. It's not creating change right away. It's creating informed change if that's what's needed. So I think the accessibility, the approachability, that piece is really important. It's very fascinating to have an elected official take you on a drive and show what's important, having staff take you on the drive and show you what's important, and a resident take you on a drive and show you what's important. And that would be kind of a very high-level approach of how I would do it, is taking bits and pieces from everyone and seeing that perspective and then somehow kind of blending that together. I would also want to make sure that there's also a little fun in the organization, because the F word is a good word when it's used that way. And I would want to make sure that that doesn't get lost, because that's something that, for me, you're in a tough business being public servants, and you can't sometimes take yourself too seriously. So that would be also a component of that.
Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Jenny, for being here again today. We appreciate it. I'm going to preface this 8th question with, this does not pertain to any specific project going on. This is just kind of a general piece. But if you believe that economic growth is vital to our community's stability and well-being through the provision of jobs, taxes, and fees that support services, how would you respond to those in the community who are vocal in their opposition to growth and development?
Well, I think the most important thing is to ask them what they would suggest in place of that, and let's talk that through. A lot of times, and I guess, maybe I'll take an example that I think the community is grappling with. You have the potential to have a large warehouse here. It adds jobs. There's property tax associated with it. It has great synergy that it will bring. And that's very good, and that's part of kind of the economic development strategy and having that here. Many people have challenges with that. So my conversation would be, well, if we don't have growth, then what do we have in place? Because what's important is transportation systems important? Yes. Is sustainability important? Yes. Is having a strong community, safe community important? Yes. How do we pay for that? When more people are coming, we want more housing, and you know that property tax doesn't pay for itself. So I really would want to, in all essence and in a very positive, constructive way, throw that question back on the residents and talk about what is the option? Because the option is not to grow, it's how in which we grow, right? And so there has to be some type of compromise, I think, in the middle of that. I'll give you one example that I think, it's not the cure-all, but it may be kind of meeting in the middle. So when I was a city manager for the city of Tracy, this particular city had a lot of distribution and warehouse component to it in one area in the industrial. I actively worked with a developer called Prologis. They owned a lot of land. They worked for their clients to build buildings and lease that space. I worked with them in all kinds of different types of businesses, and I invested in that relationship to streamline things to get it over the goal line. So when I needed them the most, they were there. Lo and behold, they had a big project, and guess what that was? A 5-story Amazon building. It was probably the 3rd building in the Bay Area to be constructed, 500 jobs, a lot of technology in the building, and they would need a variance to be able to build it. Now, there wasn't probably any problem with them getting the variance. The variance, I think they would be able to meet through the Planning Commission. But I knew this was going to be a huge game changer because of the mass and scale and scope of this. And there would be additional trips and things of that nature. So I recognized that this would be important to the community on a lot of different levels and concerning. So I worked with the developer, and I knew that we were in a very similar situation here, where it wasn't something where you could legally just say no. So what do we do? So I talked with the developer and I said, you know, I think we can get the variance over the goal line, and my ask has nothing to do with the variance. But I'm going to ask you to sit down with me and let's work through a community benefit that we can invest back in the community to show your commitment and your investment and your acknowledgement that this is a big deal. And so through negotiations, this was my conversation with the developers, it was not staff. We were able to negotiate $4 million to invest in a CIP project for recreation. It was a multi-gen facility that is actually being finished this year. So we're also playing the long run here. This is not short run, right? And so it's important that we talk about trade-offs and we recognize that while that's not going to cure everything, it could be an investment. Let's play this out. If we did something similar here, could we make an investment in sustainability initiatives? Could we make an investment in climate action, things that we haven't been able to do, that have been sitting on an unfunded list? We could, but we need to ask. But we can't ask if we don't invest and we don't have the relationships and we don't have the partnerships. So I'm not saying that that's the solution, but I'm saying that this is an approach that's something that we may need to start exploring of where can we find the yes and. Because your question is a great one. It's not easily answered. But I'm always looking for the middle ground. And so that would be my solution. And so I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Counselors, do we have any follow-up questions? Counselor Groves.
Me again.
And then Counselor Zelenka and Counselor Leach. And then Counselor Kaczynski.
Jenny, our council, probably like a lot of councils, we live with a lot of distractions. What would you do and how would you help council stay focused on our priorities and our critical issues in this sea of distractions?
Oh, every city manager's favorite question, right? That's something that I think, all councils and all cities really struggle with. But one of the things that I've done, and you may have it in your rules, that I'm also starting to put into action now, is so when council asks for something and it's not on the work plan, you have priorities, you can develop a council work plan, that guides kind of my work for the year. My job is to make sure that I'm coming back with that item, assuming that there's a majority that you want to see that on the agenda. And I'm going to have next to it what the trade-offs are. You have asked council for me to do this particular project at this price tag, and as a result, it's going to take these type of resources, which will slow down this planning project or this public works project, and it may cost money. And so here's kind of the productivity impact, or here's the dollar amount. And here's the report. What say you, council? What would you like to do? I think when you have that information in front of you, it really helps kind of refocus where your priorities are, and then you have to choose, right? And I'm not saying that choice is going to be easy, but it helps you kind of go, oh yeah, we did say that this was going to be a priority. Could we maybe do this at a later time when we have? Absolutely. So that's one approach, and my council has been asking me to do that, and we've been encouraging staff to be able to come back and to say, okay, council, can you please tell me on your list of priorities which one is most important? And those kind of can be a little bit of an awkward conversation, but they need to happen, and because there are so many things that are pulling at you in the community. So that would be in my approach is, with your blessing, to come back and to remind you of the priorities that you've set and then what the trade-offs are. And then when you say go left, we go left. You say right, we go right.
Counselor Zelenka.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. You presided over or made it through a really unique circumstance where you went from a strong mayor to a strong city manager form of government. So reflecting back on that, what do you think, what are the 3 key takeaways you took away from all of that?
Oh, there's so much there.
Yeah,
I would say,
and it was easy.
Yeah. I think the one thing I wish I could have done, but the council was not ready at the time, was there wasn't a strategic plan. I came in with no priorities, no history of retreats, work planning, anything. And so what we had to do was we had to train. We had to get the council to understand what their new role was. We had to deal with the loss and the grief of that because it's a huge loss. We had to train staff. They went with an interim city manager for 8 months, and there was no conversation with staff. It was only supporting the council. So there was a huge gap in knowledge in the organization. So if I had to do it over, and let's just say that work might have been done, I would have set the council in a place of strategic planning, something that would gel them together where they would have shared purpose and value and meaning that they could coalesce around. I think that would have been really helpful because they were all kind of trying to understand this new thing that I think they really didn't know what they had taken to the community. It's really, an evolving situation. So that's one. I think the second one would be, and I kind of got at this before in my earlier conversations, just understanding what change does to a community, to your stakeholders, even your vendors, and the organization. The cadence of change is so important to manage. I can't underestimate the meaning of how that impacts people and their ability to work. And so making sure that you don't introduce too much too soon, and that you check your ego to the side and you take it all in, that's really important. One of the things many of the things that happen, and I've been, had the opportunity to share it with some of the panelists, is that when we had the form of government change, we had the council, we had the mayor, and then we had me. And the mayor ran on a strong, and if she was here, we tell this story all the time, so I'm really comfortable in sharing it. She ran on a strong mayor platform, and she won, and it was fantastic. And then the charter won and was passed, and it was like, well, what do I do? And so we had to collectively figure out what her role was, where she would add value, because I think, she had wanted to do operations, and that was my job. So we found a space of this, government relations place where she could be a catalyst and a mover and a shaker, and something she does really well. So it's finding kind of the roles and doing that together, and it was not easy. Make no mistake, it was tough. But then the council turned over. So 18 months in the job, the folks that really were the catalyst for the charter said, peace out. And I was like, uh-oh. So then the mayor and I were like, okay, we've got to come together, and how do we onboard this new council that's very green? So we took advantage of that. But then there's more. Then the executive team turned over. So I had a lot of retirements, and they had already retired and they were working back, and they stayed around to help with that transition. But to have almost your entire executive team turn over, on top of your council changing, on top of helping a strong mayor that's no longer a strong mayor, that's tough. And I only have one person that's from the original strong mayors on my executive team now. So I've been able to rebuild that team, right, through a very different lens. And then let's just throw the budget on top of that because we need more change. So then you have budget issues. So when I say cadence of change, that's what I'm talking about. And that requires us to get out of our own way, listen to what people are telling us, do the process we need to do, and then make a decision and own it. And then we move on. The longer we hang out in the process arena, the harder it is to actually make the decision. So I've learned a lot through that process. Some was good, some was bad, but I learned. And I think that's why my longevity has been what it's been. And I'm really incredibly proud of the work. I'm glad I'm still standing. I think my mental health is pretty good. But it's been I think a really great experience. So I only got to 2, so now I need to get to 3. And I think the third one is it's really important to be centered in this work around service, and to not lose sight that when you're going through all of these changes, you have to come back to service. And that's got to be kind of the center of everything you do. And for me, that was really helpful because I was asking, who does this impact? Who am I serving? And I did that through an organizational lens, I did that through a community lens, and I did that through the council lens. And that really kind of centered me when everything, like right now, everything feels like chaos of what's happening, right? Throughout the nation, and it's just grounding yourself in that, because that's what the most important thing is to this community. We are in the people business, you know this, and so it takes people to serve people. But if service isn't in the root of everything, I think we're going to have a problem. So that's my TED Talk. I'm done. Okay.
Counselor Leach, and then I think we've got Counselor Kaczynski, and then we're coming back to Counselor Keating.
Thank you so much. You've talked a lot about prioritization today, and I'm really appreciative of that because that's something that we've all wanted to get into more with our strategic planning. How do you propose getting both a deep and broad understanding of the community's priorities to be able to set that direction for decision-making, including those who don't have access to be able to speak their voices? And what happens when those priorities in the community feel like they're opposing?
Yeah, I think that's the if, yeah. I wanna appreciate the question. I also think it's really important that we also have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right, when we make the decisions. I would say that in terms of inviting the community into the prioritization, one thing that really works is giving them kind of an exercise to go through. And I've done this with other communities. The example is a penny for your thoughts, and it is so incredibly effective. I've done it with staff, I've done it with commissioners, and I've done it with the community members. Basically have categorization of services, right? You may have safety, economic development, park and rec, library, how you can adjust it to your community. And you basically give, and we do it in groups, which is kind of fun, but you can also do it individually. And you have a certain set of amount of pennies, and you ask the individual, set the budget. So you have, I'm just gonna summarize it. You have 5 categories, and allocate your pennies where you think the most important things go. And they've got a list, and they have an explanation of what each of those categories are. And then, so they've set their budget. And then you give them scenarios. And if we had a big, property tax campus opportunity, right, come in, and there was a windfall of $2 million, and you give them 2 extra pennies, where would you put that? And so they decide to put their pennies wherever they want. Well, now we've got some economic constraints going up or going down, and we've got to contract. And I need you to cut $4 million from the budget. Where are you going to take that? and they have to determine, oh, I'm going to take this from economic development, or I'm going to take this from public safety. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult. And then you kind of turn the heat up a little bit more, and they have to make another adjustment. And so having them go through this process is not about getting agreement on everything. It's about perspective. So when you leave that exercise, you've gained perspective. You may not agree on the issue, but you've gained perspective that this is not an easy task. And you understand that there are choices that need to be made. So that would be my example of how we kind of start bringing in the community to go through that, and then talk about what was hard, what was easy, what didn't you want to do, and take some of that information and then start threading that into some of your priorities and hearing that. You have a lot of great data already on your community survey, but there's something about actually doing it yourself where it just helps you kind of process it a little bit better as a resident. I think there are ways that we could probably get to people that don't typically come out for an exercise like this, and this is where I was talking earlier about Unite Oregon and other type of CBOs that are in the community, and have them weigh in on where the best place is to maybe conduct something like this, going to on someone else's turf or doing something virtually. Right now, many people do not want to leave their homes. They want to be engaged differently. So how do we find that? But my example is giving something tangible that people can process and tactile, that they can go, oh, okay, I get it. It's not as easy as what I thought it was. And that's my goal. My goal is perspective. My goal is not necessarily agreement, because I think that we're not going to always agree. But again, we go back to the how, right? The how is always super important, because people remember how you made them feel, but they don't always necessarily remember what you said and did. Maya Angelou is a wise woman.
Councilor Kaczynski, and then Councilor Keating.
Thank you. I'm actually asking a little bit of a follow-up to Councilor Keating's question from earlier, just wanting to get a little bit more clarity, because if I'm remembering correctly, you talked a fair bit about how you've collaborated with other government partners in perhaps less extraordinary times, and wanted to hear a little bit more about how you would handle situations where there's a diametric opposition between what federal partners are asking of the city and what the stated values of the city are. You know, Eugene has passed its own sanctuary ordinances, and on top of state law, we have a climate action plan, things like that. And so how you would handle those tensions between those very clear different priorities.
Is just to ask for further clarification. Are you just talking about the tension within the community and not necessarily the partners on that? If I could share a little bit about kind of getting at what you're asking, because, I mean, let's talk about what's happening, right? So in Washington County, ICE has been ground zero. We've been dealing with it on a daily basis, and it has been tough. And some of the things that we've done in response, and I think what I really struggle with as a city manager is I want to do things that have action and that affect people in a positive way. And I struggle with some of the things that we do that may make us feel better, but don't actually do something. And so it's really hard. So for instance, one of the things that we did is we declared an emergency, but unfortunately there's no funding attached to that. So that was a real challenge in terms of using that tool. But what was really important is that the community needed to hear that we knew that this was a state of emergency emotionally. And so we were kind of redefining how we were using that tool. We also are in the process of codifying the sanctuary law into ordinance right now. So we've done that. Responding immediately is important, but it's also important to respond thoughtfully. So not a knee-jerk reaction, to really think clearly. And one of the things that we have the luxury of doing quite frequently in Washington County is comparing notes and working together so we can try to work as one, because that makes it a lot easier. Other things where we rely on community action to support folks that need help with utilities. So one of the things that we immediately did was we streamlined your ability to apply. So once you applied, you didn't have to reapply. You used to have to reapply. So we wanted to take that barrier out. We also had caps on how much money that you could keep asking for. We removed all the caps, so you can keep asking for assistance as long as we had funding available. And we did some forecasting and made some assumptions that we would have actually adequate funding. So we loosened the purse strings on things like that. And then we also immediately did economic development support on some of the hardest hit businesses, working with the chamber to be able to push videos out and kind of like mini advertisements, but supporting very specific areas that we knew were targeted and that were really struggling. So those are kind of some examples of immediate actions in terms of what's happening. And then we kind of have to go off and do some of the more strategic work on the legislative front and how do we kind of start opening some doors and some purse strings to be able to provide support. My biggest challenge is not being able to have the funding to be able to provide legal aid and rental support and all of those things that are just hurting people deeply, but working with at least our county partners that have been pushing some of those funding opportunities, as well as our partner in Hillsborough. So that's what's kind of driving me a little bit. I'm just really frustrated because we're not in a position to do that. And I know that we might be able to be creative, but once that opportunity and that money is gone, what do I do when something happens in the next month? So that's the whole like frustrating thing about all of this. I hope that helps to answer your question a little bit better.
Yes, that's
Oh,
helpful.
cool.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Council President. Councilor Krasinski, I appreciate the follow-up. Thank you. And Jenny, thanks for commenting on that federal versus local tension. My 2 cents, going back to Councilor Leach's question and your observation about the pennies and where they go, I would offer that we need more pennies.
Yes.
And I'm sure you would not be thrilled if I just pulled out a stack of pennies and put them on the table and said, consumption fee that's not regressive, property tax reform, there are looking at how we tax cannabis perhaps I would want us to get as creative as possible about growing the pie rather than cutting into the pie and cutting those core services as you talked about. I'd like to hear your thoughts about what core services are, recognizing that our community contracts out for some things that I consider to be core services by statute. Animal services in particular, we contract out with our valued partner, Green Hill Humane Society. Community-supported shelters, we contract out. We used to contract out to Cahoots, a beloved, well-known, nationally recognized model for delivering behavioral health and mental health services. What are your thoughts about protecting those core services and resurrecting that mental health, behavioral health delivery model here in our community that's now gone the way of the dodo? And yes, there are entities that are filling that hole, but what's your take? What's your angle? What's from your vantage point? What do you see in the next year or coming years? If you are to be city manager, what would you do to have a Cahoots 2.0 or a new mental health, behavioral health delivery system?
Well, thank you for that. I think it's really important to clarify that both things need to be done, where there's an opportunity to contract and be more efficient and where there's an opportunity to grow the pie, so to speak, right, and revenue. And I think that it's a marriage of both, but done very thoughtfully, right? Because we also, as with technology, we had this conversation earlier, technology also may be able to help us be more efficient and maybe not be able to have that FTE, and we could switch that FTE over to Cahoots or something like that. So I do think it's important that it's balanced. And the reason why I was probably focused a little bit more on the reduction is because I am fully aware of the climate right now that I think taxpayers are at, and I think we need to be strategic about when we ask and communicative and telling our story of what we've done, so that they're aware of that, so that when we do look at growing the pie and we do want to grow that in a way that makes sense to continue to support core services, that there is a little bit more understanding and perspective and buy-in. So I absolutely agree with you on that. I think in terms of how to be able to fund things like Cahoots, you're going to have to find either an additional revenue source, or you're going to have to find an area to contract or find some type of creative way if that's important to you. One exercise that I think was really helpful that I did with our council, and we were focusing just on the general fund, is we itemized all of the programs, the tasks under each of the general fund programs, and we identified whether it was legally mandated, whether it was statutorily required, whether there was an ordinance that the council had adopted, and so we kind of put that in kind of the mandated pot, whether it was important and whether it was extraordinary, meaning that it was above and beyond. And we showed how many FTEs it took to provide that service, how much it cost to provide that service. And we started the conversation that way so that they could actually see what we were providing, that we absolutely had to provide because the law allowed it, or we had a contractual obligation, or we had a labor contractual obligation to do that. And we started to look at priorities through that initial lens. And I think that, to get to your point, we don't cut things that are important, but if there are 5 things that we do that are important, how do we continue to do maybe the 3 really well? And maybe there are 2 that we don't do as much. Those are types of the prioritization things that I think that councils need to start having the conversation around, and it's not easy. To fund Cahoots, I mean, I don't have the crystal ball or the 8 ball to be able to figure that out in the moment. But I do think, though, that you can fund it through a series of either revenue enhancements or trade-offs. And I think it's really what this community and council wants. And part of that can be informed by data. Part of that can be informed by the community survey. And the community can speak. But I think, I want to be really respectful in that it's tough. I mean, we want to have it all. But I don't think that that's feasible. I think we really have to talk to the community and have them help us figure out what's the most important and get creative and innovative on how we do that. So I agree, and I would love to fund Cahoots and figure out how we can do that from a revenue standpoint. And if the community wants to be supportive in funding that, that's fantastic, and we should pursue that.
Councilor Clark, did you have anything? I do. I noticed in your materials that you participated in a Bloomberg-Harvard
Boundary collaboration.
collaboration, and you were able to reduce downtown homelessness by 80%.
It was the encampment.
Are you a magician?
No, it was encampments on a specific area in front of City Hall, in front of the library, and then also affected our bus shelter. So right now, we have 0 encampments in front of it. We still have encampments. You may not be able to see them, but we reduced them all in front of the library. So we had literally on the walkway to the library encampment to the left and the right. And there were multiple tents. And so we had to work with our outreach worker. This was where the county relationship was important, and the outreach worker. The outreach worker was handing out tents when we got the tents taken down. And so that was like the circular issue. That was the problem number 1. So we had to, and they really want to help, right? So that's very important, but we wanted to find avenues of, let's start working of, can we get folks in a hotel? Can we find transitional housing? And that's where our county partner was helping us. We have a very, very close working relationship with the county, and we were able to pull this off. We have, at the time, a 6-member bike team that actively works, and we have residents that come and volunteer and provide gift cards and other things that our officers can actually hand out that can support housing, temporary housing, food and whatnot. So we do have some tools like that. But part of that process was being able to talk to our partners and to figure out how we get to yes. And so I would say overall we had about 1, 2, 3, 4, I would say less than 10 encampments in that area, and we were able to reduce those by 85%. All through some basic conversations about, very simply, trying to get people in housing and trying not to continue to hand out tents if we could find a place to stay, and then building the relationship that the outreach worker actually had with the individuals that were camping. And then over time, when the camping ordinance was established, and then we had a little bit more flexibility with state law, it became a little bit easier for us because we implemented where you're able to sleep at night, what time you had to get up in the morning and move. So we were able to kind of coalesce this all together over a period of, I would say, 1 to 2 years.
I think we're at time now, but we want to give you the opportunity to ask us a question or two that may be on your mind.
Wow. Okay. So I guess for you, I would love to hear your feedback on, you have a strategic plan. It's expiring in '26. I'm really curious if you had that plan in front of you right now and you could make any change to that plan, what would be the first thing that you would change to advance the vision of Eugene?
We'll all speak up at once. Councilor Zelenka, and then we'll wrap it.
I would distinguish the strategic plan that we have as an organization and the council priorities. Those two things, to me, are pretty different, and they didn't overlap a lot for me. And so I wouldn't necessarily put all that onto the strategic plan and changing that. I would put it into the category of, let's work within this group to organize our priorities and do the things that you said. I was really taken by your creative, innovative ways of getting at prioritization. That was very, very helpful. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we would need to do.
Jenny, thank you for spending the time with us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. It was great seeing you all.
About 15 minutes until our next candidate. 5 minutes, I'm sorry. 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
and let you know what the next level of the process is going to be. Each counselor has a question for you. We will go around in council order, and we'll start off with the first question with Counselor Kuczynski.
Thank you, and thank you for being here and welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've built relationships with community partners and collaborating jurisdictions? And can you talk about what collaborations you've had that have been particularly constructive and ones that have been more challenging?
I'm not, okay, so people can actually hear me in Vancouver without the microphone, but people online can't hear me. So thank you for that, Jeff. I just want to let you know your staff have been absolutely marvelous, and it's done nothing but actually make me more and more excited for the job. So to your question, well, I mean, every position I've ever had requires intensive collaboration within the community and also with other stakeholders, whether it's other community-based organizations, business groups, neighborhood associations, other nonprofit associations. And so I feel like that's my bread and butter in my work as a city manager. I think you all are quite aware that none of the problems we face in communities are ones that we can solve on our own. I keep looking for one. I keep hoping that one day a problem will come my way that's actually fits neatly within the organizational responsibilities or within the jurisdictional boundaries of the place I work. But so far I haven't actually found one. So I approach collaboration first by building relationships with other people before we actually get to work on something. So I've said to the panel earlier, I start every new piece of work with what I call the 100 cups of coffee strategy, which is I just get out, fan out, get to know people. I show up at neighborhood meetings. I ask to be invited to neighborhood meetings. I go to board meetings of associations. I join community groups. I meet with all of you. I meet with department heads. I meet with community partners just to get to know them before we actually have to work on a problem together. Because I think a lot of the problems we collaborate with others on, it's really important to not just think of it as a transaction, but rather think of it as a long-term ongoing relationship. So I also believe that in any effective collaboration, you're probably going to run into things where you can't get everything you want. In fact, that's why it requires collaboration, right? So I try to be really clear with all of you as a city council and with the other agencies I'm working with about what are the core issues, what are the things that really, really, really define the problem and really define what success will look like, because I'm not going to get everything I want in any effective collaboration. So that's sort of the first thing. I think you all have picked up. I'm also a really outgoing person. I love to talk to people. I joke I'm only afraid of snakes and heights. I'm not afraid of ideas or interests. And so I want to hear from people what they're really thinking about, because that's how we begin to build partnerships and work together. Boy, there's a lot of stories I could tell you about successful collaborations. And there's a few I can tell you about ones that didn't go so great. So, when I was at Metro, which is the regional entity that manages the urban growth boundary in the Portland area, it also does solid waste, it does parks, and they do visitor venues. So it's got a really kind of weird suite of services, but probably the most notorious thing they do is manage the region's urban growth boundary. The agency had expanded the urban growth boundary in about 10 years before I got there, into areas where no development had happened and no development was likely to happen. And so you had population growth happening and employment growth happening, but no land for that stuff to happen on that was actually ready for development. And you had a lot of litigation happening and a lot of unhappy communities that actually wanted to see land being made available for development, both for jobs and for housing. And in that end, we had extremely active stakeholders from Thousand Friends of Oregon and the conservation groups in the region, all the way to the economic development interests and the home builders associations that really kind of were at odds with one another about what the right path forward was. And so I engaged with my elected officials because they felt equally frustrated by the fact that they had done all this work to expand the urban growth boundary, and instead of yielding development, they had yielded litigation. they were equally frustrated and said, okay, what is it that we really want to have happen here? And we sort of figured out what we wanted to have happen, and then we engaged our partner agencies, the county governments, the 25 cities, also the the advocacy groups that were very interested in our decision making. And we said, well, what would success actually start to look like? And what's the actual problem that's going on here? And as I told an earlier panel, what we ended up doing was sort of flipping the process by which urban growth boundary expansions in Portland are talked about. And in the old days, it was really what's the least impactful to farmland. And so we expanded into areas that were not the best farmland. Unfortunately, they were also the hardest places to put infrastructure. So putting pipes and roads in those places was super hard. So we flipped it on its head and said, how can we think about urban growth boundary expansions? We still want to protect farmland, but how can we first consider whether the land that we want to expand into is actually ready for development? Do they have infrastructure? Do they have market? Do they have willing jurisdictions? And we collaborated with the cities and counties of the region and the advocacy groups to figure out a new process. And now the process starts from the ground up. It starts from the local jurisdictions thinking, yes, we do want to grow, or no, we don't, because that's also an option, and approaching Metro to say, we want to develop, and here's our actual plan to do it. And we'll say they've had 2 successful urban growth boundary expansion processes ever since that new process went into place. So I can't take credit for it, because really the credit belongs to all of the folks who actually were meaningfully engaging in the process, but I helped the folks involved design a process that allowed them to engage in a way where they could get to successful resolution. One that didn't work so great. Let's see. There's so many that didn't work so great. But that doesn't mean we don't keep trying. You know, when I was at the Gorge Commission, we worked on a process to try to preserve historic structures in the Gorge. As you all might know, the Columbia River Gorge Scenic Area is a really unique form of preservation, really focused on preserving scenery, recreational opportunities, natural resources, and cultural and historic resources. And we were finding that there were a lot of really significant historic properties, and by historic, I mean after white settlement of the gorge, that were falling apart, essentially, and we weren't able to save them. And so we designed a strategy to allow the owners of those properties to actually host a small amount of commercial events that otherwise wouldn't be allowed in the scenic area. And I would say we probably didn't engage all the stakeholders quite. I mean, we ended up with a product, and there were regulatory changes, and there were probably 1 or 2 properties that were able to take advantage of the new approach, but we didn't really capture the attention of all the interest groups in a way where they really supported the outcome. And in that particular entity, you rely on the support of 6 county governments to succeed, and I would say, and they're very diverse in terms of their political viewpoints. All 6 county governments weren't necessarily on the same page about the right path forward. So I would say that was one where it's like, yeah, we came up with a really great policy idea, but it maybe wasn't a successful collaboration, and then it wasn't effectively implemented, and it didn't necessarily lead to the effective result we were after through that process.
Councilor Keating.
Thank you, Council President. Martha, thank you for being here. In an increasingly volatile political climate, how will you balance the desires of our community and council's desires with a federal administration whose policies might be at odds with and in direct conflict with the city of Eugene? And are there examples or relevant recent occurrences you can point to that might help council better understand how you will navigate these challenges?
Thank you for that question. You know, I think that's a problem a lot of local governments on the planet, certainly in America, are facing right now. And it's certainly one that we're facing in my current community. I will say the distinguishing difference is that we're not large enough to receive CDBG funds. And so unlike Eugene, where there is a pretty significant amount of federal resources at stake from the get-go, we don't face that challenge. But I will tell you that we had a very serious conversation in our community in the winter time last year about what we were hearing, because we have a significant federal loan around a wastewater project. We are dependent on FEMA dollars every time there's an ice storm, which seems to happen. Actually, we have a 3-day weekend coming up, and so usually they happen on 3-day weekends for some reason. It doesn't look like this one, but maybe February. And so we have been concerned about making sure we maintain a constructive working relationship with the federal government, at least the administration part, or the bureaucracy, understanding that they're getting new directives from the White House in terms of what we should be doing. So we had a very serious conversation about what to do with our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And I know jurisdictions throughout Oregon and the West, actually throughout the nation, are having that same conversation. I'm sure you all have seen the list of words that you're not allowed to have in your plans anymore, some of which are just profoundly amazing, that somehow you're not allowed to have the word accessibility in your plans anymore, based on White House directives. And so we had a very serious conversation about whether we were going to alter our strategies around, particularly around equity and equitable service delivery. And again, we're not a CDBG eligible community. We ultimately decided that we weren't going to change the plan or the language that we use to describe it. And at the same time, we were going to double down on our efforts to make sure our work was grounded in data. And by that, I mean, we have some pretty good pieces of evidence, for example, about who's not accessing library services and what their barriers might be, or who's having challenges using our pedestrian or bicycle infrastructure and what their challenges might be. And so we decided we did not want to change our viewpoint around our goals of taking down barriers for historically marginalized communities, and we didn't want to stop talking about it in those terms. But we were going to make sure that the actions we were taking as a local government were defensible in terms of we can actually document why we're taking these actions. Because a lot of the things that I think are under attack right now are actually our mission as local governments. So as to how do I need to go further on that? Like, our mission is to make sure every single person in our community can access the services that we provide, right? That, for me, is not an ideological issue. That's just a mission issue. And so in terms of how you apply it in Eugene, I think the additional layer that's true here that we face in my current community, but is even more intense here, is the community's expectations and pressure placed on the local government to make sure that we're still living up to those expectations, that we're truly working to serve every person, including those folks who've been historically marginalized. So I would collaborate with you, the city attorney, with our Congress people, because I will say I think those folks might be the heart of how we tackle the stuff we're facing right now, to figure out how we can continue to advance the work that the City Council has identified and that's a priority for this community in the face of an attack on the ideas that underpin that work. Hope that answers the question.
Councilor Zelenka.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks for interest in this position. Two of the many issues that are really important in Eugene, climate change and addressing homelessness, are crying out for funding, as are a lot of other things. So in an environment of limited resources and competing interests for that scarce funding, how do you address the funding for those two important issues and make progress?
Good question.
Yeah, if you have the answer, you win.
If I had the answer, no. Let me take them one at a time. I think the issues around climate, and I would separate into mitigation strategies and resiliency strategies. And I mean, candidly, I feel like we have actually slightly more tools at our own disposal related to resiliency strategies. If we believe, which I do right now, that the Northwest will face significant water shortages. In fact, the big worry I have about this glorious weather is that it's not snowing and that we store our water in the Northwest in the form of snow. Water shortages, but also really changing rainfall patterns. Last May, we had a storm in my community where we got an inch and a half of rain in 45 minutes, and none of our infrastructure is designed to absorb that. So, and then, of course, the dangers related to wildfire and wildfire smoke. So if we think about those, I feel like we have more tools at our disposal locally in terms of financing projects to deal with that. It doesn't mean the conversation's easy, but for example, if you think about stormwater capacity, we run the stormwater utility, and we have more tools and a more concrete way to talk with our community about those things. We can have more of an explicit conversation with our communities about those things than we can on some of the other stuff. And on mitigation strategies, I think, what we know is that we need to partner with the federal government, with the state government, with our electric utilities, to try to reduce the amount of impact that all of us have. I will also tell you that I live in an all-electric house right now as a deliberate move on our family's part to try to reduce our climate impact. And man, when the snowstorms happen and the power goes out, it's not that fun to live in an all-electric house. So I think we also have to think about other resiliency strategies for locals when it comes to that. Because certainly to reduce the impact of transportation, consumption, energy use, and buildings, we're going to need partnerships to do that. On housing and homelessness, I feel like I've spent the last 15 years of my career working on those issues. And the strategy, you guys are, first of all, I say this all the time, and it's clear the problem still is very prevalent in Eugene. I've seen it, I've walked around, I've experienced it. It's a big deal. But you guys have been some of the most innovative local government leaders in all of Oregon on this space. So first of all, we need to keep innovating on this space, but the capital stack for construction of affordable housing is really tough. And without a partnership from the federal government and the state government, you're expecting local taxpayers essentially to raise the capital. I worked at Metro when we raised the first affordable housing bond in that community. The voters were very supportive. They identified the need, and we were still only able to build like 4,000 units in a region of almost 2 million people. So the need is great, and the financial capacity to actually pull it off is tough to achieve. In my current community, we're building right now. We didn't build, Mercy Housing built, but we helped subsidize the first family-oriented affordable housing project, 100 units. It took a whole bunch of people coming together to build the capital stack to make that project possible. We've got another almost 100 units under construction in various capacities, and the nonprofit partners, the state of Oregon, some federal money, some local money, some tax incentives, they all have to go into the mix. So I think we have to be committed to it for the long haul. It's not going to be a quick fix. And of course, then when somebody falls into homelessness, helping them get out is a whole different suite of problems.
Counselor Ye.
Thank you. Can you tell us about your approach to using the triple bottom line or an equity lens in your work?
Absolutely. Although I always add technology into it as well, just so you know. I definitely think that almost all the problems that we face in community require us to think about how do we look for solutions where we are supporting people and social equity, where we are developing a thriving economy, where we are being sensitive to the environment, and frankly, whether we're acknowledging the rapid pace of technology. I mean, I'm sorry, I add that in because the reality is I feel like no matter how much time of my own personal professional development I spend trying to understand technology and its role in society, it's going faster than I can keep up with. I hope I'm not the only one who feels that way. But 2 years ago, I would not have told you that I would use AI to help me write talking points for the mayor, and I have done it since then, and it's amazing. Maybe the best example of that was the economic development strategy that I got a chance to work on when I was at the city of Ashland. I've talked about this briefly before, but that community obviously is home to Southern Oregon University, also the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, but it's also a very sustainability-oriented community. It's one of the first local governments that I know of that actually developed energy and water conservation programs as part of their own utility operations. And the folks who live there are very concerned about their impact on the planet. So when we developed the economic development strategy, which obviously was about trying to grow wealth and prosperity for the people who lived and worked there, We also thought about how do we do it in a way where we capture all the creative talent that's coming out of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and how do we do it in a way where we leverage that community's commitment to the environment in a way that's sensitive. And it led to some really thoughtful approaches to how to create creative zoning approaches, incentives for energy efficiency, incentives for alternative commute options for employees, in addition to how do we help grow folks who have essentially come out of the performing arts in one way or another, but have a great idea that could turn into jobs that create wealth for people in the community.
Counselor Clark.
Oh, darn it. I messed that up, obviously. Oh. So I have been intrigued for a while, and for how can we use technology to take some of the discretion and bias out of police work. So red light cameras, for example, speed cameras, means that someone who's going 45 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone gets a ticket, whether they're, a white woman or not. I think that additional complications of ALPR are the privacy and security issues. It's the same reason we haven't shifted to pay-as-you-drive insurance or a vehicle miles traveled taxing system for roads in America, is because we don't want the government in our car. So I have studied with some interest what you've all been through with the discussion in the community about Flock. And I think what we would need to do, and I'm going to not answer your question, but I'm not ducking it, is we would need to engage the community in a conversation about what are the sideboards that would have to be in place to make this technology something that the community could accept. And because I think there are useful law enforcement applications of the technology, but I also understand the privacy and security issues that folks and let's just be clear, America was founded on a distrust of government. Let us be clear. That is a cultural, it's a normal thing. It's normal, right? That folks would be afraid of what will happen to that data and who will use it for what purpose. And so I think you would engage the community and say, are there sideboards that could be put on the use of technology that we think would protect our personal privacy interests and our fear about that data ending up in the hands of somebody else who's going to use it for some other purpose? And if we couldn't get there, I'd say you don't deploy it, because it doesn't, what we ought to be focused on is building trust with the people who live here, building trust. And so if we can't design sideboards that build trust with our residents, we shouldn't do it. However, we can, it's a good application, but it has to have sideboards.
Martha, my question is in the same vein as a follow-up to Councilor Clark's. What safeguards do you think are necessary for the use of artificial intelligence and related emerging technologies in city work? And the example that I'm going to is I have read in various publications where police officers and maybe some police departments across the country are now using AI to write their reports.
That's actually was one of my first anxieties when I heard about AI, was that we would use it to write police reports and we'd be sending out to the universe confidential data that we would otherwise never send out to the universe. So we have begun to deploy AI tools in my current organization on purpose, with intention, because we know people are going to use it anyway. Let me be clear. People are going to use it anyway. And so we have collaborated with city employees and some technology experts and privacy experts around what are the things that we need to put in place to make sure that we're not sending personal information out into space. And this is another one where I think you'd want to have a pretty clear conversation with the community about what are you doing and why are you doing it? Or at least be very open and transparent in a forum like this about, so folks know what's going on. One tool we're using uses exclusively city data. So it's all our data. And so I just told you that I use this tool to help the mayor write talking points about a park we were opening. And it draws only from our own data. It doesn't draw from outside world, which means it can't make anything up, right? Because one of the concerns in addition to sending confidential information to Sam Altman, we should also be worried about AI's hallucination features, right? Because it does make stuff up. And so that's one tool that we've used. We also are using another tool right now that doesn't send any information out. It might draw information in, so we do have to worry about hallucination, and we do have to fact check the information that we get. But all the product, the work, including the queries that we put into the AI tool, are ours. And we have to retain them for public records purposes, so anybody could find out what they are. So, but at the same time, they're not going to feed any other large language models that are out there in the universe. I also believe you have to have ethical standards and practices in place for your staff. We actually also discovered that some of our police officers were using an AI tool, and unfortunately it was an inappropriate tool, which is why we went to this tool that I just described, which is it might draw things from the outside world, but it doesn't send anything back to the large language model. We're not sharing with the outside world. You have to have good standards and practices in place that let your and training programs in place that let your employees know what the tools are, what they do, and what's expected of them when they use them. And then last but not least, you have to disclose when you use it. You just simply have to disclose. So if you read my talking points for the mayor about the opening of the park, you would see down below that says this was partially generated by a deep search on Prophecy AI. So people need to know that it is an original product. And then last but not least, of course, there has to be a human at the end reviewing and validating the work that's done up to that point. I wish I could tell you I hadn't put a lot of thought into this, but unfortunately I've had to put a lot of thought into this because the fact is the tool is very convenient and easy to use, and if you don't design a process that makes it possible for people to use it appropriately, they will use it inappropriately.
Councilor Leach.
Hi, thank you for being here, Martha. Could you please describe your approach to building an efficient, collaborative organization where employees feel supported and valued? And what specific actions would you first take to move or to continue the culture in that direction?
Thank you. That's a great question. It's actually one of my top priorities is to make sure make sure that the folks in there, all the work that we do for people, by people. And so making sure the folks in the organization understand the mission, have a clear sense of their own jobs and how it fits into the big picture, feel like they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to succeed, get great supervision, like all of those things are super important because otherwise we don't get any of our work done collectively. And frankly, folks who've chosen public service deserve given the sacrifices that they make to be in public service. They deserve to feel like they're part of something bigger, because they really are part of something bigger. So, I mean, I usually start with making sure our mission and values are very clearly defined. Because for me, the mission is, what is it that we actually do in the community? And the values are about what does great performance look like as an employee. And every organization I have ever worked for has a mission and clear values, whether we have articulated them or not. And so I don't know if that makes any, every place I've ever worked has a strong organizational culture. It's usually a great one, usually with a little quirks in it. You gotta work on that, you gotta sand off the quirks, but make sure we've got a clear articulation of what is it we're about as an organization, and then what is it that we value from our employees in terms of good performance. And I can tell you from having been here for a couple of days that there's a clear culture here, and people have a clear sense of mission and purpose, and so we would make sure it's clearly written down and repeated and reinforced and recognized and celebrated every time we see it in action. Where was I? I was out this morning for a bike ride, and I was watching some of your employees trim the shrubs in the Riverfront Park, and it was like they were taking clear pride. It was being done so well, and it was like beautifully orchestrated. And it's like, no, we would celebrate that, because that's something that we need to do. But you also you collaborate with your executive team and your middle managers and your frontline supervisors. Let me also say out loud that culture is made at the front line. Culture is made at the front line, and those frontline supervisors need to make sure they have all the tools, all the skills, all the resources that they need to be successful, because if they're not successful, then it doesn't matter what the rest of us do when we sit in our offices. And so that's the other thing. I'd collaborate with HR and the department heads to make sure that our entire management team had the skills, the talent, and the resources that they needed to be successful. But I would also start, to the first part of your question, I would start with the same thing. I would start with the community. I'd get to know the departments, get to know the culture, do some ride-alongs, really just take some time to really soak in the organization before I did anything. Like I said, I like to bathe in the organization a little bit before I develop a plan. So there's probably a better word than bathe. That's probably not the right metaphor.
Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Martha, for being here. It's good to see you again.
Yeah.
This next question I'm going to ask is not predisposed to any specific process or project that's being developed here in our community. It's more of a general, how would you approach something? If you believe that economic growth is vital to our community's stability and well-being through the provision of jobs, taxes, and fees that support services, how would you respond to those in the community who are vocal in their opposition to growth and development?
Well, I've been an Oregonian a long time, but I'm not a native, and so I totally understand the impulse that we love it just the way it is, and we want to roll up the gates. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have made a California joke once or twice, so maybe nobody else in this room has, but I certainly have. So I actually am sympathetic to those folks who are concerned about the impact of growth and change on their communities, because this is a magnificent place. It is a magnificent place just the way it is today. But we also know, because we know, that communities don't stay the same. They either get better or they decline. And my family is from suburban Detroit, and they're getting better now, but for a long time they were in decline, right? Because of what was happening in the economy. And so I would probably do the same thing I do with everything else, which is I would try to unpack what's underneath that. Because a lot of times when we hear the no voice, not every time, we're hearing folks' fear. We're hearing, and I am well known for saying people fill in blank spaces with darkness. And so we have to help folks see light and color. And we have to talk with them about their children and their grandchildren and their nieces and nephews, and wanting to keep them here and wanting to keep them in a place where their children can be successful. And that's how you do it. You don't dismiss the concern or try to talk them out of it because it's real. And I don't like traffic. Does anybody like traffic? Right? I don't like noise. I don't like the fact that Farrell's isn't there anymore and then La Perla's gone under and it's a Thai restaurant. I don't like that. I don't like the fact Cafe Xenon's gone. Councilor Leach heard me say this earlier. But it happens. And so the question is, if we don't have a strategy that's about retaining the business community that's here, helping them grow, helping new entrepreneurs start businesses and grow their businesses here and change, what we will get is decline. And so that's the conversation. So the question is, how can we have a discussion about change, but preserve the things we care about as a community, whether it's open space or water quality or clean air? Like, how do we talk about what we're not willing to lose as part of that conversation? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to lose the opportunity for my children to be able to live in Oregon and have successful, thriving lives, including, and I bet you there's a lot of folks in Eugene who feel the same way.
Thank you, and there are.
Okay, do we have any follow-up questions from council? Counselor Keating.
I miss
And Counselor
Farrell's
Groves.
as well.
That just tells you how old I am, unfortunately.
And in La Perla. La Perla had a great lasagna. But Crub Crua Thai
Is it
excellent.
good?
And they're closed on Tuesdays, but they open tomorrow at 11 if you're still in town.
Okay.
And he's only part
I'm
owner.
gonna need a second round, Council President. Martha, thanks for answering these questions, and I'll get a more thoughtful question to you in a second.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council President. Martha, probably not unlike all councils, we live with a constant amount of noise and distractions.
Yeah.
In living with a sea of noise and distractions, how would you, as city manager, keep council focused on mission, purpose, and priorities?
Great question. So obviously, I'd want to collaborate with you on the design of how we would do that, right? I would want to design it in a way that you all support it. First of all, I love your strategic plan. I think it's well thought out. I love the fact that not only does it have externally facing issues that y'all want to work on, but you actually have an eye towards the internal operations of the city as an organization. As someone who sometimes feels like I have to stand on a chair and shake my fist to get elected officials to care about internal ops, I appreciate very much that you've done that. I would probably suggest, and I also have seen in your strategic plan that you do have sort of a top list of council initiatives. I always try to have the council think about it this way. The most precious resource that the city has isn't money. It isn't even staff time. It isn't even community attention. It's your time. There's only so much of it. I heard last night at State of City you had 100 meetings last year. Wow, that's a lot, but you only had 100 meetings. You didn't have 400 meetings. And so I like to think of the time that you spend here as your resource to budget. And at the beginning of a cycle, before going, and maybe once a year, I'd like to sit down with you in an open session, in a goal-setting context, and talk about how do you want to spend your time in the upcoming year. Now, I've seen from your council rollout that you already have some things on the docket, but I think, and you also, I will also say, you have to leave time for the stuff that comes up. Stuff comes up. Every year, stuff comes up. It might be an Amazon warehouse. It might be, I don't know what it might be, but stuff will come up. But, and then I like to allocate collaborate with the mayor and all of you to schedule your time, map it out over the course of the year to figure out how are we going to advance this project. And then the biggest threat to the noise isn't really the community or me, it's all of you. And I mean this with affection. You will have an idea, right? You will have an idea. And I want you to have ideas. That's why you got elected, is to advance an agenda, to reflect the values of the people of the community, to get work done. And then we have to have a conversation about where does that idea fit in with your budgeted council time. And we have to be disciplined about it. So I would probably visit with you quarterly about, here's what you told me you wanted to spend your time on. Here's how we're doing on those projects. How's it going for you? And then when one of you has an idea, I don't know what it might be. Like 6 new pickleball courts next to it. No, I'm kidding.
In a residential neighborhood.
In a residential neighborhood less than 50 feet from the closest home. No, let's not do that. Then we just have to have a realistic conversation as where does that fit in with all the other priorities that the council's identified. I mean, we just have to be real about it.
Councilor Zelenka.
So, Martha, you've got gobs of experience, Albany, Milwaukee, River Gorge, Ashland, Metro.
Yeah.
Lake Oswego, doing these kind of leadership positions. And all along the way, you've been trying to help commissions and councils figure out what's most important. We're going to be going into a prioritization process. I'm curious how you would approach that. And, you know, there's some people that think police and fire, if you don't have that, these are the ones at the top of the pinnacle of the hill, and then everything else is nice to haves. And there's other people that think that, no, all of this milieu of different kinds of services and things that we do makes what Eugene, what we love about it.
Right.
So how do you balance all that, and how do you help us go through that process and the community at the same time?
Yeah, I think, let's be clear that everything that the local government does, we do for a reason. It serves a constituency, someone in the community, someone's are passionate about that thing, right? So I actually did listen to your study session, and I heard the word core services floated, or phrase, I guess it's a phrase, 2 words. And it's a tough one because it's not that simple. It's not that simple. So within every service that we offer, there are trade-offs about the level of service that we want to provide. And so that's where the conversation has to happen, and that's where the conversation's hard. So let me give you an example. In the community I get to work in right now, we send a police officer to every car break-in to take the report in person. We have the resources to do that. It's a community priority to provide that level of customer service. The community adjacent to us doesn't have those resources. They require anyone whose car is broken into to fill an online report. That's where the trade-offs are. It's not in police and fire are the most important, because of course public safety is super core. It's a question of how fast do you want a police officer to get to a call? What calls are we going to send officers to versus sending a CSO? And so it's really hard because every time you start in that conversation, you are, first of all, again, somebody cares about that. There's somebody in your community who's going to get up and talk about why that. You could elect to mow the parks every 10 days as opposed to every 7. And there's going to be some folks in the community who are concerned about the impact of that on their use of the parks. And of course, the things that some people label quality of life services are safety net services for other people, right? So everything we do in local government, some of you heard me say this earlier in the week, it enables us to live closer together as humans. In some ways it's obvious, right? Like providing sanitary sewer services keeps us from getting cholera. And sending police and fire officers to emergencies is our insurance policy, right? We are insured against the worst things that could happen to us. But the services we provide in in parks or in library are equally important to enabling people to live healthy and successful lives. I joke about the fact that I'm really grateful during COVID that I had 2 parks within walking distance of my house, because I might have actually killed one of my children if it hadn't been a park. So I think the problem is we want to frame it as if there's a clear pyramid and something's most important, but the reality is it's all about what kind of community do we want to build and what are our expectations about the role of the local government in achieving that community vision. So I would set up the process, frankly, to force you, let's be candid, to force you to have those kinds of conversations, not a conversation in the abstract where we talk about police versus parks, because that's not it. It's a question of what kind of community are we aspiring to, and what level of service are we as a city going to provide to move towards those expectations? And it'll be very hard. But I do think that what that conversation enables, though, is if we get to the point where we say we're not willing to compromise on this service because we think it's very important to our community and its future, then we can actually have a conversation with the community about revenue options. Then we can say, look, we've really debated this. We really think this is fundamental to who we are as a community, and we need to figure out a new way to pay for it.
By trade-offs, do you mean that it's a zero-sum game?
Well, you got to balance the budget.
Yeah.
Only the federal government can go into debt.
You do this, someplace else has to give.
Something has to give. There's a finite amount of money, right? There's a finite amount of people, and so we have to, if we aren't willing to increase the size of the pie, we have to divide the pie up differently.
Councilor Keating.
Thank you, Council President. Martha, you've talked in the past with this body about challenges that you have overcome and learning from failure. No one of us are perfect, and I would submit that you often learn more from mistakes than you do from successes. Could you touch on that kind of aha moment and what maybe your biggest failure as a city manager is and how that has translated into future successes?
By a project failure or personal failure?
Dealer's choice. Yes.
Maybe I'll tell you 2 stories. I'm well known as someone who can form an opinion, and I'm sure you guys have all picked up on that, even though I ducked Councilor Clark's questions about it. I didn't really duck it, because I do think it's a question about aligning community values with the practice. I think sometimes I can see something really clearly. I'll tell you a story, but not everybody sees it, or I fail to account for countervailing or forces, if that makes any sense. I'll tell you a short story. And actually, a couple members of the city council in Lake Oswego also, they share part of the blame on this. Our school is part of it, but of course, whenever that happens, I actually take the blame, but that's another story for another day. Our school district has a shrinking elementary age population. Actually, because of the way tuition for high schools and middle schools work, they're not facing the same dilemma for their middle schools or high schools. But they know that sometime in the next 5 years, they need to close an elementary school, which is, of course, one of the most painful things any community can ever go through. I actually went through it when I was in Ashland as well, where the district had to close 2 schools. It's horrible. So they started a process to talk about sort of how to make the decision. And one of the schools that they were considering is along Boone's Ferry Road, which is a very significant farm-to-market road that goes from Wilsonville all the way into Portland through one of the most lovely commercial districts in Lake Oswego, just the neighborhood I would have cruised in if I'd gone to high school. I mean, maybe none of you went cruising, but I did go cruising. That school has the most commercial real estate value, and the neighborhoods around it have sort of the most flexibility to have the kids go from that school. There's 2 adjoining schools, they're not a huge distance apart. So they began talking about potentially closing that school. And at the same time, we have a library that was built in 1984. When we built it, we knew it was too small, and like a lot of construction in Oregon in the 80s, we didn't use the right materials on the building. I don't know if Eugene's faced any of those issues, but let's just say water is bad. And if it rains 6 months of the year and you've designed a building that doesn't manage water properly, you're gonna have trouble in Oregon. So it was too small the day we opened it, and we've had a lot of problems with the building because we didn't, because in the 80s we were dumb collectively in terms of buildings. And so we saw this school district site as an opportunity to have a conversation with the community about a new site for the library. It's in an urban renewal district, which means we might have money to bring to the party. And also we, like your library, our library is a hub of community activity, and so we thought it would contribute to the business community in that neighborhood. And also it might enable us to do some other stuff, like we don't have any outdoor event spaces in that neighborhood, and so we thought, well, we could also collaborate with the Parks Department and build an outdoor place for events. Could be awesome. So we started talking about it without engaging any of the parents. And the conversation blew up. I mean, the conversation was already hard, right? Because anytime you're talking about moving people's elementary age kids, I don't know about you, but I still have friends who I see regularly, who I met because our kids went to kindergarten together. And so there's just a lot of social network there. And so we started talking about it. And because we could see it. We could see how cool it could be. It could be cool. It could be cool for the district. It could be cool for the library. It could be cool for the community. And actually, it could still be cool, but we were way ahead of ourselves. So that's probably my story, is sometimes I get ahead of myself. I count on the people I work with, including my elected officials. And again, my elected officials also saw it. They also thought it sounded like a cool idea. So we kind of got super excited about it. And maybe we should have slowed down. So that would be what I have to do, is I have to surround myself with people who tell me, slow down. I'm always open to new data and information. I don't mind changing my mind. I have no ego in terms of being wrong. I'm comfortable in those spaces, but sometimes I see it and I just want to go for it.
Martha, do you have any questions for us?
Oh, I'm so tired. No, I don't think I do. What have I missed? I guess I would like to tell you that I feel like I've built a career that has led me to this place and to this moment. And I think we could have fun together. I mean, not everything we're going to work on is going to be fun. Right? A lot of the problems that you all are working on, that we would work on together, will be hard work, but I think we could do it from a spirit of public service and knowing we're building a better place. I am actually enthusiastic about engaged communities, although I was telling a panel yesterday a story about once taking my kid to a grocery store in a community I worked in, where I wished I'd had a little anonymity because she had a tantrum in the store. And I just wanted to get out of the store, and people in the store wanted to talk to me about city business. It was okay. I think I bought beer that time as a result of that. But I love working in places where people care about their community enough to engage with their local government, and where they have enough confidence and trust in their local government to show up. So I feel like this would be a blast for all of us, not every moment, but that we would have fun together and we would accomplish great things for Eugene. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Martha, and this concludes our interview.
Guys, can I Thanks, Matt.
You'll have other moments with the mayor.
Thank you for letting me do that.
That, Mayor, I think, are you gonna ring us out?
You adjourn.
Yeah. Yeah, you have your script.
Do indeed. Just want to say, for the record, thank you all for that series of conversations, and for anyone in our community who's able to listen. Incredibly educational and valuable time spent. I now close the January 13th, 2026 City Council special meeting, and we are adjourned.